Yo! Welcome to Horcrux Harry. Got an absolute banger for you today. What if Hermione touched Harry at age 7 and hidden Veela blood awakened, claiming him instantly? Like, subscribe, comment below. Let's go. Chapter 1. The touch. The library smelled like dust and old paper and something that might have been possibility, if possibility had a smell. Hermione Granger thought it probably did. She was 7 years old, and she had already read every book in the children's section twice, which was why she was now standing in the mythology aisle of the adult section, pulling a book about Greek legends off the shelf with the careful reverence of someone handling something sacred. Her mother was 3 aisles over, pretending to look at cookbooks while actually reading a romance novel with a shirtless man on the cover, which Hermione had noticed and chosen not to comment on. Her father was at work. It was a Tuesday in August, and the Chiswick Public Library was almost empty. Almost. She heard him before she saw him, a quiet, concentrated kind of stillness that somehow made more noise than movement. The soft scrape of a chair being pulled out. The careful, deliberate way someone sits down when they're trying not to be noticed. Hermione peered around the end of the mythology shelf and saw a boy her age at one of the reading tables, a stack of books beside him that was nearly as tall as he was. He was small and thin, with black hair that went in every direction as though it had given up on being managed, round glasses that were slightly too big for his face, and an expression of such deep, complete absorption in whatever he was reading that Hermione felt a flash of recognition so sharp it almost hurt. She knew that expression. She wore it herself. She walked over because she couldn't think of a good reason not to. "What are you reading?" she asked. He looked up. His eyes were very green behind the oversized glasses, and he didn't seem startled, which most people were when she spoke to them without preamble. He considered the question seriously before answering, which she also liked. "Greek myths," he said, and tilted the cover so she could see. "D'Aulaire's Book of Greek Myths. But I've read this one already. I'm looking for something with more detail. The myths in here feel like they've been..." He paused, searching for the word. "Sanded down. Like someone took the edges off." Hermione stared at him. Then she held up her own book, which was Theogony by Hesiod in a Penguin Classics translation with footnotes. "I just pulled this off the shelf," she said. "It has the original versions. Some of them are quite violent." The boy's eyes lit up in a way that was immediately familiar. "Can I read it after you? I'll be a while," she said honestly. "That's okay," he said, just as honestly. "I'm not going anywhere." She sat down across from him. She wasn't sure why. She usually preferred to read alone, and she never in her life sat down next to a stranger without being asked to. But something about the way he'd said "I'm not going anywhere" felt like a fact rather than a reassurance, solid and uncomplicated, and Hermione had always trusted facts. They read in silence for 45 minutes, which was longer than Hermione had ever sat quietly next to another person her age without one of them getting bored. The boy never fidgeted. He moved through his books with the same methodical absorption she recognized in herself, finishing one, setting it aside with a small decisive movement, opening the next. "I'm Hermione," she said eventually, because it seemed like relevant information. "Hermione Granger." "Harry," he said, without looking up from a book about Norse mythology. "Harry Potter. Do you live near here?" He hesitated, just slightly. "No. I took 2 buses." That struck her as unusual. "By yourself?" "My aunt and uncle don't really." Another small pause. "They don't take me places. So I go myself." There was something underneath those words, something compressed and careful, and Hermione was very good at reading the spaces between what people said and what they meant. She decided not to push on it. Instead she said, "I come here every Tuesday and Thursday." And let the information sit there in case he wanted to do something with it. He looked up at that. Something in his expression shifted, not quite surprise, but something quieter and more careful. Like he was deciding whether to believe the offer was real. "I could probably get here on Thursdays," he said finally. "Good," she said, and went back to Hesiod. It was when she reached across the table to slide Theogony toward him, she'd hit the section on the Titans and wanted to cross-reference with his Norse book, that it happened. Her fingers brushed the back of his hand. It was the most ordinary physical contact imaginable. A glancing touch, barely a second. The kind of thing that happened a dozen times a day without anyone noticing. The world stopped. Not metaphorically. Not in the way people described when something surprising happened. The air in the library went thick and golden, and Hermione felt something in her chest, something she hadn't known was there, something that had apparently been asleep her entire life, lurch awake like an animal startled out of hibernation. It was not painful. It was the opposite of painful. It was the feeling of a key turning in a lock that you didn't know existed, and behind that lock was a room full of light. Her hair lifted. Not gently, not in a breeze, it lifted, every strand of it, and began to glow at the tips with something that wasn't quite gold and wasn't quite white and was more beautiful than either. The air around her shimmered. Harry had gone very still. His eyes were wide behind his glasses, and she could see, she could feel, which didn't make any sense at all, that her magic had reached him and recognized something there, and whatever it had recognized it had decided, with absolute and unambiguous certainty, yes. The books on the table nearest to her flew open simultaneously. Every page turned at once, rustling like a flock of startled birds. Hermione yanked her hand back. The glow faded. The books settled. Her hair fell back to its usual chaotic halo. They stared at each other across the table. "What?" said Harry, very carefully. "Was that?" "I don't know," Hermione said, which was the most terrifying sentence she had ever spoken, because she always knew. Her mother appeared at the end of the aisle approximately 4 seconds later, moving with the sharp, quick urgency of a parent whose child has done something unexpected, cookbook still in hand. She stopped when she saw Hermione's face. Then she looked at Harry. Then she looked at the books scattered open across the table. Her face did something complicated. "Hermione," she said in a voice that was working very hard to be calm. "Come here, sweetheart." "Mom, something happened, I know." Jean Granger said it like she'd been dreading saying it. "I know. Come here." Hermione stood up from the table. She looked back at Harry, who was watching her with those green eyes that somehow managed to be both very young and very old simultaneously. "Thursday," she said. He nodded once, steady as a fact. "Thursday." The conversation in the car was not a conversation so much as a one-sided confession, with Hermione listening and her mother gripping the steering wheel with both hands and staring at the road like it had personally offended her. Jean Granger's grandmother, Hermione's great-great-grandmother, had come from France. This was the part of the story the family had always told. The part they hadn't told was why she had come from France, which was that she had been running from something, specifically from a community of magical women called Veela who had very strong opinions about bloodlines and obligations and who you were allowed to love and marry. Great-great-grandmother Colette, being a thoroughly modern woman for 1923, had told them precisely what they could do with their opinions and had crossed the channel with a man named Robert Granger and a charm she'd commissioned from a French wizard that would suppress any magical inheritance in her descendants until it was. Her mother paused here and gripped the wheel harder. Triggered. "Triggered how?" Hermione asked. Her mother was quiet for a long moment. "Contact with a compatible magical signature. Skin to skin." She exhaled through her nose. "We were always told if it happened, we'd know." Hermione thought about the golden light, and the room full of warmth, and the absolute certainty of yes. "It happened," she confirmed. "Yes," her mother said. "I can see that. What does it mean?" "I don't entirely know. Your great-great-grandmother left notes, but they're in French, and they're about Veela customs, and I've never thought about them much because I didn't think." She stopped. Started again. "Veela bond to a person, Hermione. The way the story was always told to me, it's not something that can be undone once it happens. It's not dangerous," she added quickly. "It's not like a curse. It's just permanent." Hermione considered that for a long, serious moment. His name is Harry, she said. He reads Greek and Norse mythology, and he takes buses by himself. He lives somewhere where no one takes him places. Her mother glanced at her in the rearview mirror. He has magic too, Hermione said. I could feel it. It's like. She searched for a comparison. Like standing next to a river. A very fast one. She looked out the window at the passing streets. I don't think he knows he has it. Most magical children don't know, her mother said quietly. Before they get their letter. You know about letters? Another pause. Another careful breath. Colette's notes are comprehensive, Jean Granger said finally. I just never thought they'd be relevant. They drove the rest of the way home in a silence that was full of things being rearranged and reconsidered, and when they got inside, her mother went straight to the attic and came down 20 minutes later with a wooden box that smelled like cedar and old magic, and inside it were 3 notebooks written in slanted French handwriting and a letter addressed, in a hand that looked like her mother's but wasn't, to the girl it happens to. Hermione read all of it before dinner. She went to bed that night knowing 3 things with absolute certainty. She was part Veela. Harry Potter was her bonded. And whatever was coming next was going to be the most interesting thing that had ever happened to her. She fell asleep smiling. On Thursday, she brought the notebooks. Harry was already there when she arrived, at the same table, with a new stack of books. He'd upgraded from mythology. He had a book about particle physics that was clearly aimed at adults and a second-hand copy of a science fiction novel with a cracked spine. He looked up when she sat down. He'd been thinking about it too. She could see it in the particular quality of his stillness, which was the stillness of someone who had been very busy inside their own head. I looked it up, he said without preamble. What happened? I looked up everything I could think of that might explain it, but I couldn't find anything that. He stopped. Did you find anything? Yes, she said, and put the notebooks on the table between them. She explained it clearly and without unnecessary softening, because she had the sense that Harry Potter was someone who preferred truth to comfort, and also because she was someone who preferred giving truth to comfort. She explained about Colette, about the suppressed bloodline, about what Veela were, magical beings of French origin with abilities relating to allure, elemental fire, and a bonding instinct that was ancient and not entirely understood, and about what it meant that the suppression charm had broken. Harry listened to all of it without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, So it's permanent. According to every source I could find, yes. And are you all right with that? Hermione blinked. She had expected a lot of possible responses. She hadn't expected that one. What do you mean? He adjusted his glasses, a gesture she was already learning meant he was choosing his words. It's your bond. Your magic did it. I didn't do anything. You're the one who doesn't get a choice, and I just want to know if it feels wrong. To you? She stared at him for a long moment. He was 7 years old and he was asking if she was okay with something that had been done to her rather than asking if he was okay with it, and she understood then, with the same certainty as the yes in the library, that the bond had not made a mistake. It doesn't feel wrong, she said quietly. It feels like. She thought about the room full of light, the key in the lock. Like something clicking into place. Does that make sense? Yes, he said, and something in his shoulders released slightly. That's exactly what it felt like. Are you all right with it? He thought about that with the same seriousness he gave everything. I've never had anything that was just mine, he said finally. Everything about my life belongs to other people. My aunt and uncle decide everything. I don't get to want things. He paused. This feels like something I'm allowed to want. If I do want it. He looked at her directly. Which I think I do. Hermione nodded once, the way she did when something had been decided. Then we're in agreement, she said, and pushed the Norse mythology book toward him, and they spent the next 2 hours reading in the comfortable silence of people who have sorted the important things out. He came every Thursday after that. sometimes twice a week in the summer. They wrote letters when they couldn't meet. Hermione had found, in Colette's notes, a reference to magical posts that could reach other magical children, and had spent 2 weeks figuring out how to access it, which mostly involved a very specific intention when sealing the envelope and a post box on Charing Cross Road that had an extra slot that Muggles couldn't seem to notice. Harry's letters were short at first, then longer, then long enough that she had to use both sides of the paper, and occasionally a second sheet. She learned him in pieces. He lived with his mother's sister and her husband in Surrey, in a house where he was kept in a cupboard under the stairs and treated as something between an unpaid servant and an inconvenience that couldn't be legally returned. He never said this directly. He said things like, "I have to do the garden before I can leave, and my cousin broke my last pencil, so I had to buy a new one with money I found in the sofa, and I slept in a bit because my cupboard doesn't get light until the sun is high enough." Hermione read between the lines with the cold, focused fury of someone who had been told all her life that injustice should make you angry, and had turned out to be right about that. He learned her in return. She knew this because his letters started including things like, "I thought of something you'd find interesting and I found a book you'd like. I left it on the shelf second from the left in the mythology section, and I've been thinking about what you said about Plato, and I think you're right about the cave." He listened to her the way almost no one did, not waiting for her to finish so he could say his own thing, but actually absorbing what she said and building on it. By the time they were 9, their letters read like a conversation that had been happening for years and had no particular intention of stopping. The magic got stronger as they got older. Hermione noticed it first in herself, the Veela inheritance, now fully awake and no longer suppressed, growing with her the way a muscle grows with use. She didn't have an allure, not exactly, not the way the old stories described it. She didn't enchant people against their will. What she had was more like a presence. When she walked into a room intending to be noticed, people noticed. When she got angry, the temperature actually rose, a faint shimmer in the air around her that her mother had learned to recognize as the precursor to something catching fire if Hermione didn't breathe through it. She also had what the notebooks called the connaissance, knowledge that came through the bond rather than through research. She knew when Harry was upset before he said so in his letters. She knew when he was in pain, a low-grade awareness like a radio signal she'd learned to read. Once, when she was 9 and he was 9, she woke up at 3 in the morning with her heart pounding and a certainty like ice water that he was hurt, and in his next letter he mentioned, carefully and briefly, that his cousin Dudley had broken 2 of his fingers and he'd had to reset them himself by reading about it in a first aid book. She wrote back a letter that was 12 pages long and left scorch marks on 3 of the paragraphs. Harry's response was 4 lines, "I'm fine." They healed straight. "Please don't do anything that gets you in trouble. But thank you for being angry on my behalf. No one does that." She kept that letter. His magic, for its part, was not subtle about growing. He mentioned things in the way someone mentions the weather, incidentally, without emphasis. That told her his accidental magic had gone from occasionally things moved to I accidentally fixed the school computer that had been broken for a year, and the teacher thought it was the IT person and I was doing the lawn, and I thought about how the Dursleys were going to a restaurant for dinner without me and the lawnmower started itself and did the whole garden in 5 minutes without my touching it. He described these things with curiosity rather than fear, which she thought said everything necessary about his character. They didn't talk about Hogwarts, because either of them needed to. Colette's notes had been explicit about the school, and Hermione had spent her 8th birthday reading Hogwarts, a history which her mother had tracked down through the magical post system, and had cross-referenced it with 6 other sources. She knew it was coming. Harry, through their letters, had figured out enough to know something was coming even if he didn't have a name for it yet. The summer before their 11th birthdays, they arranged to meet in London, a proper meeting, not just the library, the first time they'd seen each other in person since that Tuesday in August. Her parents drove her. Harry took 3 buses. He was taller. She was 2. He'd gotten a new pair of glasses that were slightly less enormous. She'd grown her hair longer and discovered that the Veela inheritance expressed itself in her hair specifically in a way that made it, not less bushy exactly, but more intentional. It did what it wanted, but what it wanted was increasingly recognizable as something with its own aesthetic logic. They met outside the British Museum, which had been Hermione's suggestion because she'd wanted to see the Elgin marbles and the Greek mythology exhibit, and Harry had said of course you do in his letters with an affection that was, she had noticed, completely free of sarcasm. He was waiting on the steps when her parents' car pulled up, and when she got out and walked up to him, he looked at her with the same expression he'd had in the library, direct, unguarded, unbothered by things like social convention or the requirement to pretend he didn't notice things. "You look different," he said. "I'm always different," she said. "You look taller. Little bit." He glanced past her at her parents, who were getting out of the car. His expression did the complicated thing it did whenever family came up. "Are they know everything," she said. "My mum's read all the notes. She's not going to make it weird." Her mother did not make it weird. Her father, who had been briefed by her mother and was approaching the entire situation with the baffled goodwill of a man trying very hard to be supportive of something he didn't entirely understand, shook Harry's hand and said, "Good to meet you, Harry," with genuine warmth. Her mother looked at Harry for a moment, and then said quietly, "Are you all right?" in a way that had nothing to do with pleasantries and everything to do with the things she'd read about in Hermione's letters. Harry blinked. "I'm fine," he said reflexively. "I'm sure you are," her mother said pleasantly. "I'm asking anyway." Something in his expression shifted, just slightly, and he said, "Better than I was. Getting better." And her mother nodded like she'd gotten the real answer. They spent 4 hours in the museum. Hermione did not hide her knowledge or her opinions, and Harry did not seem to want her to, and her father did not once tell her she was being a know-it-all, which was the experience she was used to with adults. Harry walked through the Greek exhibit like he was revisiting somewhere he'd studied for a long time, which he had, and when he stopped in front of a marble head of Athena and said, "She always seemed like the most honest of them, she just said what she was, everyone else was always hiding." Hermione thought she understood more about Harry Potter in that sentence than she would have from a year of letters. On the steps of the museum, afterward, eating sandwiches her mother had packed because London sandwiches were expensive, Harry said, "I think the letters are coming soon. Hogwarts ones. My birthday's in September," she said. "Yours is in July. Yours will come first." "I know." He ate a piece of his sandwich. "I've been thinking about what we know. About the school. About," he paused, "everything. And?" He looked at her directly, the way he always did when he decided something. "I think we should go in knowing what we are," he said. "Not hiding it. Not pretending to be less. We know things other first years won't know. We have." He gestured vaguely but accurately. "What we have. I don't want to pretend I'm just some kid who didn't know anything until September." Hermione felt the warm certainty of agreement settle in her chest. "Neither do I," she said. "I've been hiding what I am my whole life at school. I'm done with that." "Good," he said, simple and final. They finished their sandwiches. Her parents were talking to each other a few steps away, giving them space with the tact of people who had figured out that these two children needed slightly less supervision than average. "Harry," she said, "what do you want? When you're at Hogwarts? What do you actually want?" He thought about it. The London wind moved through his hopeless hair. "To learn everything," he said. "To not be owned by anyone. To be good at something that's actually mine." A pause. "To have what I have without someone trying to take it or manage it." She nodded. "Then that's what we'll do." He looked at her, and something in his green eyes was steady as a fixed star. "I know," he said. "I know it is." The letter came to number 4, Privet Drive on a Tuesday morning in July, and it came not alone but in a flock of 11 identical envelopes that arrived via 11 separate owls, which the Dursleys found alarming in ascending degrees. Vernon found the first 4 alarming, the 5th triggered a specific kind of tight-faced fury. And by the 11th he had barricaded the mail slot with masking tape and was standing in the kitchen making statements about abnormality that became less coherent as they went on. Harry collected the first letter off the hallway floor before Vernon could reach it. He read it in 4 seconds, tucked it into his back pocket, stood in the kitchen while his uncle ranted and his aunt pretended not to be listening from behind her cup of tea, and felt something settle into place with a quiet, decisive click. "I'll need money for my supplies," he said, when Vernon paused for breath. The silence that followed was the silence of someone whose script has gone entirely off the page. "What?" Vernon said. "Hogwarts. School of Witchcraft and Wizardry." Harry pulled the letter out and set it on the kitchen table with a certain deliberate calm. "It's a real school. I'll need money for the books and equipment. I've read the supply list." Petunia made a sound like a small, trapped animal. "You are not," Vernon said, going the particular shade of purple that meant something operatic was approaching. "Going to any, I'm going," Harry said. Not loudly. Not particularly emphatically. Just as a fact, the way Hermione stated facts, with the absolute confidence of someone who has checked their sources. "I've been going to the library for 4 years and I know what I am and I know what this school is, and I'm going. The question is whether you'd like to make that easy or difficult, because either way the outcome is the same." He was 10 years and 11 months old. He was not large. He did not raise his voice. But the kitchen lights flickered slightly when he spoke, and the dishes on the drying rack rattled, and there was a warmth in the air that had nothing to do with the July morning outside, and Vernon Dursley, who had spent years convincing himself that what he feared about this boy was merely abnormality rather than power, took one step back. "We don't have money for..." Petunia started. "I have a vault at Gringotts," Harry said, which he'd gotten from Hermione's letters, which had included research, which had included a section on how the magical economy interfaced with inherited family wealth and specifically the properties of the Potter family trust. "My parents left money. I just need a way to get to London." Another silence. Different quality. "My mother," Petunia said finally, in a voice like she was pulling something up from very deep water. "My mother's mother was magical. Our grandmother. She had a vault too." Harry looked at his aunt. This was the most she had said to him about magic in 10 years that wasn't framed as an accusation. She was staring at the table, not at him, her jaw tight. "The Potter's vault access is through Gringotts in London," he said, keeping his voice even. "I can get there by bus." Petunia looked up at him. Something in her face was complicated in a way that made her look briefly like a different person, someone who might have, once, been curious about what she'd been excluded from rather than simply resentful of it. "I'll drive you to the station," she said. Vernon made a noise. She looked at him, and whatever she communicated in that look, he subsided. "Thank you," Harry said. He went back to his cupboard. He took out the small stack of letters he kept in the loose board under his sleeping bag, 4 years of Hermione's handwriting, careful and passionate, and growing more elaborate with age, and he'd put them in his bag along with the Hogwarts letter and the book on Norse mythology he'd borrowed from the library and not yet returned and the 3 books Hermione had sent him through the magical post that he'd read twice each. He wrote a letter that afternoon and sent it from the post box on the corner, which he'd figured out how to use after Hermione had described it in exhaustive detail. Letter came. 11 owls. Uncle made it dramatic, but it resolved. "Petunia is driving me to the station Thursday. Meet me in Diagon Alley? I'll be at Gringotts at 10. He thought for a moment, then added, "We're going." Hermione's response arrived before he'd gone to bed. 4 words and an exclamation point, which was unusual enough for her that it told him everything about how she was feeling. "I'll be there." Finally, Petunia dropped him at King's Cross on Thursday morning without speaking much. He got out of the car, pulled his bag onto his shoulder, turned back. She was looking at him through the window with that complicated expression again. He waited. "Your mother," she said finally, through the open window, in a voice he'd never heard her use, flat and effortful as someone lifting something too heavy. Was better at it than I was. The magic. She always made it look. She stopped. Swallowed. Be careful. It was not an apology. It was not warmth. It was the closest thing to both he was likely to get from Petunia Desley, and he recognized it for what it was. I will, he said. And meant it. He took the underground to Charing Cross Road and found the leaky cauldron on his second pass, which he would have been annoyed about except that the magic pulling him toward it was interesting in itself, a sensation like someone adjusting a compass needle. Hermione was waiting outside Gringotts with her parents, her hair doing the thing it had started doing 2 years ago, where it framed her face with what could only be described as intent. She was wearing a blue jacket and carrying a notebook, and she spotted him from 20 meters and walked toward him with the straight-backed, purposeful stride that was entirely her own. You found it, she said. Second try, he admitted. Same. She didn't seem bothered by this. I've been reading about Gringotts since January. The exchange rates are actually quite fascinating. Tell me inside, he said, because they were blocking foot traffic, and she laughed, a real one, quick and bright, and nodded. Her parents fell into step beside them, her father offering Harry his hand again, her mother asking him if he'd had breakfast in a way that suggested the correct answer to the question was yes, and she would not be accepting no. He'd had toast, which he reported, and she looked at him in the particular way she'd been looking at him for a year and said, We'll get something after Gringotts, in a tone that closed the matter. The goblins at Gringotts were not impressed by much. Harry noticed that. He also noticed that when he stated his name and his vault at the main desk, the goblin who dealt with him did a very small, very controlled double-take before recovering with professional smoothness. He filed this away. His vault was larger than he'd imagined. Not obscenely large, he was not naive about money, but solidly large in a way that suggested the Potters had been both successful and careful across generations. Stacks of gold galleons and silver sickles and bronze nuts, organized in the particular way old wealth organized itself. He took what he needed with the deliberate efficiency of someone who has thought about this, and knows exactly what the list requires. In the cart on the way back out, the goblin, Ragnuk, who had introduced himself with slightly more courtesy than Harry had expected, said, There are additional items in the Potter vault, Mr. Potter. Documents, heirlooms, a secondary ledger. Most heirs review these at age 11. Can we schedule that? Harry asked. Of course. We will all you to arrange a time. Hermione, sitting beside him in the cart with her own notebook open, was writing. He glanced at her page. She'd written Potter family assets, schedule review, and underlined it twice. He looked at her. She looked at him. Neither of them said anything, but the thing between them, the warm, certain channel of the bond, carried something that was entirely mutual. They came out into the pale July sun with coin pouches and supply lists, and a full day of Diagon Alley ahead of them, and Harry stood on the cobblestones of a magical street for the first time in his remembered life and felt, in the marrow of his bones and the specific warmth behind his sternum that was Hermione and the bond and magic recognizing itself, that he was exactly where he was supposed to be. Ollivander's last, Hermione said, reading from her organized list. Wand choice is significant, and shouldn't be rushed. Books first, then robes, then potion supplies, Ollivander's first. Harry said. She looked up. Why? Because everything else depends on what we find out there. He looked down the alley, where the narrow crooked building with the peeling gold letters waited at the far end, and something in him pulled toward it with a certainty that had nothing to do with planning and everything to do with instinct. The wand is the most important thing. Everything else follows from that. Hermione considered this. Then she closed her notebook. All right, she said. Ollivander's first. They walked down Diagon Alley together toward whatever was going to happen next, and Harry Potter did not feel like a boy going to his first day of something new. He felt like someone who has been preparing for a very long time and has finally arrived at the thing they were preparing for. The summer light was gold on the cobblestones. The magical world smelled like spices and old wood and something electric. And beside him, Hermione Granger walked with her chin up and her notebook tucked under her arm and her Veela inheritance warm in the air around her like a second sun. They were ready. They had been ready for years. The only question was whether the world was ready for them. Chapter 2, Diagon Alley. And the weight of a name Ollivander's was narrower inside than it looked from the street, which Hermione suspected was a deliberate architectural choice made by someone who understood that constraint created focus. The shelves went all the way to the ceiling, row after row of long thin boxes in shades of cream and gray and pale cedar, and the dust motes in the air moved in patterns that were just slightly too organized to be accidental. The old man appeared from between two shelves the way cats appeared from under furniture, suddenly, completely, with no intermediate stage of arrival. "Harry Potter," Ollivander said, and his pale eyes were already doing their unsettling thing, luminous and fixed, cataloging. "I wondered when you'd come. Your parents, now, your father, James, 11 inches, mahogany, pliable. Good for transfiguration. And your mother." He paused, the way someone pauses before saying something they consider significant. "Your mother, Lily, 10¼ inches, swishy willow. Lovely for charms work. Remarkable woman." His gaze moved to Hermione. Stayed there longer than Harry expected. "And you?" "Hermione Granger," she said, because she had learned that offering information you were about to be asked for was more efficient than waiting. "Yes," Ollivander said slowly. "Yes, I can see that." He was looking at her the way he'd been looking at Harry, but differently, with a quality of recognition rather than anticipation, as though he were seeing something he'd read about in a text and was now verifying against the original. "Granger. French extraction on the maternal side. Quite far back." His eyes moved between them, and something shifted in his expression. "Well, that's interesting." "What's interesting?" Harry asked. "The two of you," Ollivander said simply. "In my shop at the same time. Together." He let that sit for a moment, then turned with the quick, decisive energy of a man who has had an interesting thought and is moving to act on it. "Mr. Potter. Let's start with you. Wand arm?" The process took 45 minutes and 11 wands, which was not, Ollivander informed them, with what might have been enthusiasm, particularly unusual. What was unusual was the nature of the wands being rejected. The first wand, a beech and dragon heartstring, 9 inches, produced a sound like a struck bell from deep in the shelves and nothing else. The second, an ash with unicorn hair, blew the door open. The third, a cedar with phoenix feather, Harry held for 3 seconds before every box within 2 meters slid off its shelf simultaneously. "Remarkable," Ollivander kept saying, and not in a distressed way. "Remarkable, remarkable." Hermione was watching from the chair by the door with her notebook. She was writing. Harry caught her eye on the 7th wand, a walnut, dragon heartstring, 10 inches, which did something genuinely alarming to the ceiling fixture, and she looked back at him with an expression that said, "I'm taking notes, and this is fascinating." He felt, through the bond, her interest and her confidence in him, warm and steady as a hand between his shoulder blades, and it made the next wand easier. The 11th wand Ollivander brought out from a box he retrieved from a very high shelf via a rolling ladder, moving with the purpose of someone who had known they'd end up here. He held it out with both hands. 11 inches, he said. Holly. Phoenix feather core. A pause. "I've had this one a long time. I always thought it would be for someone specific, though I couldn't have told you who. The phoenix that gave this feather," he looked at Harry steadily, "gave only one other feather. Only one." Harry took the wand. The warmth that moved through him was not explosive. It was the opposite of explosive. It was the feeling of something vast settling into a space exactly sized for it, like water finding its level. The air in the shop went still and golden. The dust motes stopped entirely. And then, from somewhere in the stacked shelves above, a sound built, not a crash, not a bang, but a deep, resonant chord that seemed to come from every wand and every box at once, a sustained note of recognition. Hermione stopped writing. "Oh," she said quietly, and Harry understood from the way she said it that she'd felt it through the bond too, felt what he felt, the rightness of it. That, Ollivander said softly, has never happened before. Not like that. He looked at Harry with those pale eyes, and for once they were not cataloguing or assessing but something closer to solemn. Curious. Very curious. He glanced at Hermione. Your turn, Miss Granger. She stood up and came to stand where Harry had been. Harry moved to the chair with his holly wand, which he was not putting down. Hermione's process took less time. 5 wands, 16 minutes, though the 5th wand was preceded by 4 that produced reactions ranging from spectacular to quietly destructive. The first sent a stream of flame across the counter, brief and gold, and Ollivander said, "No, no." Not in alarm but in the manner of a researcher noting a result. The second produced a sound like distant music that made Harry's chest tight in a specific, Veela-adjacent way, and Ollivander looked at Hermione with heightened attention. The third did nothing. The fourth turned all the window light copper for 30 seconds. The 5th wand Ollivander placed in her hands was vine wood with a dragon heartstring core, 10 3/4 inches, unyielding. The shop filled with heat. Not unpleasant heat, clean, directed heat, the kind that came from something very controlled doing something very deliberate. And then Hermione's hair lifted exactly as it had in the library, 4 years ago, that same gold-white light at the tips, and the air around her shimmered, and the wand in her hand glowed at the tip for a sustained 2 seconds before settling. Ollivander breathed out through his nose. There it is, he said. Vinewood chooses those with hidden depths and a great inner fire. It is not a common combination with Veela heritage. It is not an easy combination. He looked at her with something that was almost reverence. It will be exceptionally powerful in your hands, Miss Granger, and occasionally difficult to control, which I suspect is something you are accustomed to. The fire or the power? She asked. Both, he said. She paid for the wand and Harry paid for his, and they went out into the alley, and Harry turned his wand over in his fingers in the July light, feeling the way it sat there, perfect and self-evident, and Hermione was doing the same with hers. He knew what we are, she said. Not a question. He knew something. Harry agreed. How much, I'm not sure. He said the phoenix that gave your feather gave only one other. She looked at him. Voldemort. I know. That's not a coincidence. No, Harry said. It's not. He felt the fact of it settle in him without particular drama. He had spent 4 years reading mythology, history, philosophy, and an increasing volume of magical theory as Hermione's letters brought more and more reference material within reach. He had thought about Voldemort in the abstract way you thought about historical facts, not with fear, because fear seemed like a response to something that could surprise you, and he had been not surprised about Voldemort for years. It means we'll have to deal with each other eventually. We knew that already, Hermione said. There's prophecy material in Colette's notes, not specific to you, but about the nature of bonded pairs and conflict. She was quite thorough about the historical record. What does it say? That when a Veela bond is allowed to reach its full expression, the combined magical potential of the bonded pair is not additive. It's multiplicative. She glanced at him sideways. Which is part of why the Veela community tried to control it so strictly. Colette's notes have a whole section on the political dimensions. Harry thought about this as they walked down the alley toward the bookshop. So they knew what a bonded Veela pair could do and tried to put rules around it. Tried to put people around it, more specifically. Control who the Veela bonded with. Ensure the resulting power stayed inside structures they could manage. She said it with the particular precise distaste she reserved for things she found genuinely objectionable. Colette refused because she loved Robert Granger and because she said. Hermione had that look she got when she was quoting something she'd memorized. The right to choose is not a luxury offered to those with power. It is the most essential thing power is for. Harry looked at her. I like your great-great-grandmother. So do I, Hermione said. I've never met her and I like her extremely much. Flourish and Blots was organized chaos in late July, full of Hogwarts-bound students and parents moving through the narrow rows in a state of mild collective overwhelm. Hermione moved through it like a woman with a purpose and a list, which she was, pulling books off shelves with the efficiency of someone who had spent 3 weeks pre-researching what she needed and had already read 2/3 of the first-year curriculum through materials sourced via magical post. Harry followed at her elbow, which was partly because he trusted her judgment on books and partly because the shop was crowded enough that staying close was practical, and they had long ago reached the comfortable physical shorthand of people who trusted each other's proximity. He was aware, in the shop, of being looked at. He noticed it outside Gringotts too, but it was stronger here, in a smaller space, with more magical people concentrated together. It wasn't unfriendly, exactly, or most of it wasn't, but it had a quality of attention that he recognized as recognition, people seeing his scar and doing the mathematics of his face and arriving at a conclusion and then staring at it. He found it mostly uninteresting. He had never particularly wanted to be noticed by strangers. What he did notice was a family on the far side of the shop, red hair, unmistakable, the kind of large warm family that took up a lot of space without being aggressive about it. 5 children visible, ranging from what looked like twins his age to a girl a few years younger and a boy who was clearly the same year as Harry, red-haired and long-limbed and looking at his school book list with an expression of someone doing arithmetic they don't like the result of. The boy looked up and their eyes met briefly, and Harry nodded. The boy nodded back with the slightly startled quality of someone who hadn't expected to be acknowledged. "Ron Weasley," Hermione said beside him, not looking up from the shelf she was examining. "Arthur Weasley works in the Ministry, misuse of Muggle artifacts." Families considered blood traders by traditionalist families, which means they've chosen association with Muggle-borns and half-bloods over maintaining pure-blood social standing. By all accounts, they're decent people. She pulled 2 books off the shelf. He'll probably want to be your friend because of who you are. The question is whether he can be your friend for the right reasons. You've been researching the other students? I've been researching the social landscape. She corrected. There's a difference. I'm not interested in people's personal details. I'm interested in understanding what we're walking into. She handed him one of the books. Hold this. He held it. What about Draco Malfoy? She paused. What made you say that? Because if the Weasleys are on one end of the blood politics, there has to be an other end, and the name Malfoy came up twice in Colette's notes in contexts I didn't like. Hermione's mouth curved slightly. Lucius Malfoy was a Death Eater who claimed to have been under the Imperius curse during Voldemort's war. The family is wealthy, traditional, and politically influential. Draco is the son. She moved to the next shelf. He'll want to establish dominance early. Most likely through your name, trying to align you with his worldview before you understand the landscape well enough to refuse. I understand the landscape, Harry said. I know that. He won't know that. She looked at him. He'll expect you to be either overwhelmed or flattered. He won't expect you to have done your homework. People rarely do, Harry said, which was a lesson 4 years of being underestimated at the Dursleys had taught him thoroughly. He was, as it turned out, exactly right. The Malfoy family entered Flourish and Blotts 15 minutes later, and the shift in the shop's atmosphere was palpable. Not fear, exactly, but the specific social recalibration of a room adjusting to the arrival of someone accustomed to being significant. Lucius Malfoy was tall and composed and wore his wealth like a second skin, moving through the crowded shop as though space were a service the room provided for him. Draco, beside him, had the quick, sharp eyes of someone who had been taught that reading a room was a survival skill. Draco found Harry within 20 seconds. Harry had been expecting this and watched it happen with idle interest, the flicker of recognition, the calculation, the decision to approach. You're Harry Potter, Draco said. He had the slightly over-precise diction of someone who has been coached in how to speak to important people. Yes, Harry said agreeably. Draco's gaze moved to Hermione, sitting cross-legged on the floor beside the shelf with 3 books opened simultaneously, and his expression did a complicated thing, assessment, then a flicker of something that might have been appreciation before becoming something less certain. The Veela inheritance was not visible exactly, But it was present in the way heat from sunlight was present, undeniable even if you couldn't point to the source. Most people responded to Hermione by becoming slightly more careful, as though they could feel the fire and were sensibly orienting away from it. "And you are?" Draco asked her. "Hermione Granger," she said, without looking up from the book. A pause. "Granger isn't a wizarding name." "No," she agreed. "It's a French name with magical roots that predates most of the families currently concerned about such things." She turned a page. "Is there something you needed?" Draco blinked. Whatever script he'd prepared, it had not included being addressed with polite indifference by a girl reading on the floor. He refocused on Harry. "We'll be starting at Hogwarts together," he said, which was less opener and more recovery. "It matters who you associate with. I can help with that. Show you the right. I know who to associate with," Harry said. Pleasantly, without heat. "I've been thinking about it for a while, actually." "You've been in the Muggle world," Draco said, and there was a faint edge of something in it that wasn't quite disdain but was heading in that direction. "For 10 years, Harry agreed. "It was educational. I recommend libraries." He picked up the book Hermione had handed him earlier and examined the spine. "Your father's watching us," he added conversationally. "He looks like he's trying to decide what this conversation means. You can tell him it means we've met and I wasn't interested in being managed if you like." The silence that followed had a particular texture. Draco Malfoy was not stupid. Harry could see that in the way he processed what had just been said, the quick recalibration behind his eyes. He had been set up to perform, and someone had just made it clear they could see the strings. His expression went through 3 things in rapid succession: offense, reassessment, and then something that was almost grudging interest. "You're not what I expected," Draco said. "What did you expect?" "Someone easier." He said it like he wasn't entirely sure he should be saying it, which was the most honest thing he'd said since arriving. "I know," Harry said. "Most people do." Draco left without his father having to come over, which probably cost him something in terms of the expectation he'd been sent in with. Harry watched him go with a mild satisfaction that was not triumph. Triumph felt like it required more effort, and looked down at Hermione. "Well?" she asked, still reading. "He's not stupid," Harry said. "He might be interesting later if he figures out how to use his own brain instead of his father's." "Or he might not," she said. "Or he might not," he agreed, and sat down on the floor beside her, because it seemed like a reasonable place to be, and read over her shoulder until she'd compiled everything she needed, and it was time to move on. Madame Malkin's involved standing on a podium while an enchanted measuring tape assessed his dimensions from 14 different angles, which Harry found mildly surreal and Hermione found immediately interesting from a magical mechanics standpoint. She stood beside her own podium while robes were pinned and adjusted, conducting a low-voice running commentary on the possible enchantments involved that the seamstress found either charming or exhausting, difficult to tell from her expression. "Extra robes," Hermione told her mother when they rejoined her parents outside. "We'll need more than the list says." "The list is the minimum." "The list is the minimum," Harry confirmed, who had had the same thought, and Jean Granger looked between them with the expression she reserved for moments when they finished each other's sentences. "I've arranged a seamstress through the magical post for later work," Hermione added. "One who handles non-standard requirements. In case things—" She paused delicately. "Need adjustment." Her mother understood this to mean in case the Veela inheritance produces additional requirements at inconvenient times, which was what Hermione meant. "Very sensible," she said. They had lunch at a small cafe tucked between the apothecary and a shop that sold second-hand telescopes, where the tables were outside on the cobblestones and the food arrived via plates that floated from the kitchen window, which Harry's first bite told him was enthusiastically worth the mild existential novelty of being served by sentient crockery. Richard Granger, who had spent the morning being very good-natured about a world he didn't understand and couldn't entirely see the edges of, put down his fork and said, "Harry, I have to ask you something, and I want you to know you don't have to answer." Harry looked at him. Okay. Your home situation. In Surrey. He said it carefully, in the tone of a man who has been briefed and is restraining himself. Hermione's told us some of it. We've been wondering if there was something we could do. The offer sat there, genuine and slightly clumsy and entirely well-meant. Harry looked at it for a moment. He had thought about this, in the abstract, over the years, what it would be like if someone offered. He had always assumed it would feel destabilizing. It didn't. It felt like being handed something he'd learned not to expect but had always needed. I'm going to Hogwarts in September, he said. Which means I won't be there most of the year. I can manage summers. He paused. Having somewhere to go over Christmas, if the school allows it, you'll come to us, Jean said with a finality that was not unkind. That's not a question. He looked at her. She looked back with the steady, practical warmth he'd been receiving in person for a year now and in letter form for longer, and he understood that she was not offering charity. She was offering membership, which was entirely different. Thank you, he said, and meant it in more directions than the word usually covered. Under the table, Hermione's foot pressed briefly against his, warm and deliberate, and he felt through the bond the thing she was feeling, which was a satisfaction so deep it was almost fierce. He pressed back. Her father cleared his throat and picked up his fork again and asked about the apothecary, which was the first item on the afternoon list, and they moved on. The apothecary smelled like everything at once, dried herbs and sulfur and something sweet underneath that Harry eventually identified as honeysuckle oil, stored in tall amber bottles along the highest shelf. The proprietor, a heavy-set witch-with-stained fingers who moved through her own shop with the certainty of someone who had memorized every inch of it, was brisk and helpful and asked them twice if they'd taken potions before, and when Hermione answered her the second time with a summary of theoretical knowledge that covered most of the first-year practical syllabus and some of the second, she looked at her with the expression of someone revising an estimate upward and said simply, "Take the larger cauldron. The standard issue ones crack on anything above a medium brew." They took the larger cauldron. At the Owl Emporium, Harry stopped outside and looked in through the window for a long moment. The owls regarded him from their perches with the composed patience of creatures who understood time differently than humans did. He went inside and spent 15 minutes walking the rows slowly, and then he stopped in front of a snowy owl in the middle of the shop, white as winter, who looked at him with amber eyes and the absolute self-possession of someone who has already decided and is waiting for the other party to catch up. "This one," he said to the shopkeeper. The snowy owl stepped onto his arm with practiced elegance and held there, steady and certain, and Harry looked at her and felt the specific warmth of something choosing you back. "She needs a name," Hermione said from beside him. "I know." He thought about it. The owl watched him think. "Athena," he said finally, remembering the marble head in the British Museum, and what he'd said about it. She just said what she was. The owl ruffled her feathers once in what seemed like acceptance. "She likes it," Hermione said. "She does," Harry agreed. Hermione had decided against an owl. She had access to Harry's and to the magical post system, and she'd spent a month researching familiars and concluded that what she wanted was not an owl. She told Harry this while they were walking to the last stop of the day, and he didn't ask what she wanted instead, because he had a working theory and wanted to see if he was right. He was right. She stopped outside a small shop tucked between two larger ones, barely a proper shop front, with a hand-lettered sign that said Magical Creature Companions, Specialist Inquiries Welcome. Inside, after a conversation with the proprietor that involved Hermione describing the specific magical resonance she was looking for with a precision that the proprietor found either remarkable or exhausting, again, difficult to read, she was brought a cat. The cat was ginger and flat-faced and looked at the world with the judicious disdain of something that had seen quite enough of it, thank you, and had formed its conclusions. When Hermione crouched down and held out her hand, the cat regarded it for 3 full seconds and then walked forward and pressed its forehead firmly against her palm, and Hermione's face did something it rarely did in public, went completely unguarded, just for a moment, something young and delighted. Crookshanks, she said, like she'd already known. The cat settled into her arms with the decisive air of a problem solved. Harry's theory had been correct. He stored this information away in the part of his mind labeled things that are useful to know about Hermione. They were on their way back through the alley toward the leaky cauldron when it happened. He heard it before he saw it, a sound of raised voices from ahead, near the entrance to Nocturne Alley, and then the specific quality of crowd noise that meant someone was being humiliated in public. He and Hermione exchanged a glance and moved without discussing it, which was how they moved generally. A boy about their age, slight, dark-haired, wearing robes that were slightly too large, was backed against the wall at the Nocturne entrance while 3 older boys, maybe 14 or 15, did something with their wands that made small controlled sparks land near his feet. Not spells. Just sparks. Just enough to make him flinch. Half-breed, one of the older boys was saying, in the tone of someone who has learned a word and likes the weight of it. Shouldn't be shopping on the proper alley, should you? The younger boy's jaw was set and his eyes were furious, but he was outnumbered and wandless. His wand hand was empty, which meant either he hadn't gotten his wand yet or they'd taken it. Harry couldn't tell which. Harry didn't think about it especially hard. He walked up to the nearest of the 3 older boys and stood close enough that the boy had to turn around to address him, and said pleasantly, "That's enough." The boy who turned was larger than Harry and knew it, and he had the easy cruelty of someone who'd been allowed to do this so often it had become boring. He looked at Harry with the flat assessment of a bully calibrating a threat, and then he saw the scar and recalibrated again because the recalibration made him angrier, not less certain. "Not your business, Potter," he said, which told Harry he'd recognized the scar. "I'm making it my business," Harry said. He could feel Hermione beside him, not behind him, beside him, aligned, the warmth of the bond and the warmth of the Veela inheritance both present in the air between them, and the temperature in the alley had gone up approximately 3 degrees in the last 30 seconds. "Walk away," the boy said, with his wand out now, and his friends following suit, 3 to 2, but counting wrong because they weren't counting correctly. Hermione's vinewood wand was in her hand without Harry having seen her reach for it. She hadn't pointed it at anything. She didn't need to. The light coming off it in the dim end of the alley was the warm gold white of the bond and the Veela fire together, and all 3 older boys looked at it, and at her, and the calculus of the situation reorganized itself visibly in their faces. "You were told," Harry said, "to walk away." They walked away. Not running, they had enough pride for that, but moving with the purposeful efficiency of people who had remembered somewhere else they needed to be. The dark-haired boy was staring at them. Harry turned to look at him. His eyes were dark and his jaw was still set with the residue of his fury, and he looked at Harry with an expression that was trying very hard not to be grateful and failing. "Theo not," Harry said, because the name had come up in Hermione's research, attached to a family with complicated politics and a father who had made his choices on the wrong side of the war. "Your father is in Azkaban." Nott's expression went rigid. "Yes." "That's got nothing to do with you," Harry said. "Same school year as us?" "A beat." "Yes." "Then we'll see you at Hogwarts." He turned back toward the main alley. Hermione fell into step beside him. Crookshanks settled over her shoulders like a highly opinionated scarf. "That was Rookwood's nephews," she said quietly. "The older boys. The eldest one will be in 5th year. He'll remember this." "Good," Harry said. "I didn't say it was a problem," she said mildly. "I said he'd remember. There's a difference." Behind them, Nott was still standing at the Nocturne entrance, watching them go. Harry could feel it the way you felt eyes on you in a quiet room, distinct and directional. He didn't look back. "Do you think he'll be important?" Hermione asked. "I think everyone is important until they're not," Harry said. "And I think he's someone who chose not to be his father, at least so far, and that takes more than most people give it credit for." She was quiet for a moment, and then, "You're going to make that boy loyal to you, and you're not even trying to." "I'm not trying to make anyone loyal to me." "I know," she said. That's exactly my point. They reconvened with her parents at the Leaky Cauldron entrance as the afternoon light stretched toward early evening, the alley behind them full of the sounds and smells of the magical world doing its ordinary things. Harry stood in the entrance and looked back down it, at the crooked buildings and the cobblestones and the owls overhead and the people moving through it all with the ease of those who had never had to decide whether to believe in it. He had believed before he'd ever been given a reason to. That felt like something. Athena sat on his shoulder and regarded Diagon Alley with her amber eyes as though measuring it against her own standards and finding it acceptable. Crookshanks regarded it from Hermione's shoulder in exactly the same way. Harry found this symmetry quietly satisfying. Ready? Hermione's father asked. Yes, Hermione said. Harry looked at her. She was standing in the doorway between worlds, literally, the magical alley behind her, the Muggle pub ahead, the September light coming from somewhere beyond, and she was exactly herself in a way he thought she probably hadn't been permitted to be in most spaces most of her life, and something in him that had been calibrated toward the future for as long as he could remember said, this is what we're doing this for. Not the magic. Not the power. Not even Hogwarts. This. The fact of her standing in a doorway with a cat on her shoulder and a wand in her pocket and 4 years of letters between them, being exactly what she was without apology or adjustment. Ready, he said. Her mother was already through the door. Her father held it. Harry followed Hermione through, and behind them the Leaky Cauldron swallowed the sound of the magical world and replaced it with the comfortable noise of people having drinks on a summer evening, and ahead of them was the Muggle Street and the Tube and the separate journeys back to separate houses. But September was 6 weeks away. And September was coming. In 6 weeks, everything that had been growing between 2 7-year-olds in a library, all the letters and the Thursdays and the notebooks and the arguments about Plato and the fire that was always just under Hermione's surface and the river that was always just under Harry's, was going to meet the world that had a different story prepared for them. Harry already knew what he thought about that other story. He reached King's Cross well past 7, took the Tube south, got off at the right stop and walked the familiar streets back toward Privet Drive. The coin pouch was in his bag, heavy and real. Athena rode his shoulder and drew exactly 2 looks from strangers, both of which he ignored. He turned onto Privet Drive and felt the specific dull weight of the street, the identical houses, the identical gardens, the way the whole place was designed to make you feel like deviation was cosmically incorrect. He had grown up feeling like a deviation in this street. He had spent 4 years understanding that the deviation was the point. Number 4 was lit up in the front room. He could see the blue television light through the net curtains. He let himself in quietly, went past the kitchen, stopped at the door to the cupboard under the stairs. He'd been sleeping there for 10 years. He stood and looked at the door for a moment, then looked up at the ceiling, then walked to the foot of the stairs. I'm moving into the second bedroom, he said, to the general direction of the living room. Dudley doesn't use it. A long pause. The television sound continued. Fine, said Vernon Dursley, from behind the closed door, in the voice of someone who has run out of a particular kind of fight. Harry went upstairs. The second bedroom had a bed and a window and enough space to lay out his trunk and open it fully without hitting the walls. He opened the window for Athena, who stepped off his shoulder and out into the summer night with the purposeful air of an owl who had things to do, and he unpacked his books onto the desk that was already there and sat down and started reading the first-year Transfiguration textbook, which was not required reading but which he had bought anyway because it was available, and he was curious. Outside, the summer night was warm and full of stars. Somewhere across the city, he knew, Hermione was probably doing exactly the same thing. He read until midnight. He slept well for the first time in years. Chapter 3. The sorting that wasn't the Hogwarts Express left at 11 o'clock, which meant Harry was at King's Cross by 9:30, which Hermione had told him was unnecessary and he had done anyway, because he liked having time to think before things happened. He found a bench on the concourse with a sight line to the barrier between platforms 9 and 10 and watched the magical families filter through. A boy could tell, once he knew what to look for. The slightly too deliberate casualness. The trunks that were heavier than their owners' efforts to move them should have allowed. The owls. The Weasleys arrived at 10:15 in a controlled chaos of red hair and overlapping voices and a cart that kept trying to roll sideways. Harry recognized Ron from Flourish and Blots. He also recognized the twins, identical grins, identical energy, the particular quality of movement that said they were always in the middle of something that hadn't quite become a prank yet. Their mother was moving them toward the barrier with the efficient desperation of a woman who had done this too many times to be sentimental about it, and was now simply trying to hit the deadline. He watched Ron go through the barrier, just walked straight at the solid-looking pillar between 9 and 10 and vanished, and then stood up, adjusted the handle of his trolley, and followed. The other side was different in the way all magical places were different, more real, somehow, or differently real. The air carrying the Colan steam smell of the Scarlet Train and the particular noise of a few hundred children beginning something together. Harry moved his trunk to the train, found an empty compartment near the middle of the last carriage, and sat down to wait. Athena was already at Hogwarts. He'd sent her ahead the night before because she'd seemed impatient with the idea of a train, and he respected the opinion. The compartment stayed empty for about 8 minutes, and then Hermione appeared in the doorway with Crookshanks in a carrier and her trunk levitating behind her with the ease of someone who had been practicing wand work since July. "You're early," she said, as though surprised, which she wasn't. "You're earlier," he said. "My parents cried," she said, sitting down across from him. Not explaining further. He understood. He'd seen it coming when her father had shaken his hand 3 more times than necessary at the barrier entrance, and her mother had held on to her for an extra moment with her eyes closed. "Not badly. Just, you know." "I know," he said, though he didn't, not from personal experience. But he could feel her feeling of it through the bond, that particular bittersweet weight of being loved in a way that worried for you. Crookshanks was released from his carrier, and immediately claimed the seat beside Hermione with the proprietary ease of a cat who considered all available surfaces his own. He looked at Harry. Harry looked at him. They had reached an understanding in August. Crookshanks had approved of Harry by the simple method of sitting on him, which apparently constituted a formal endorsement. They talked about what they expected, which quickly became a conversation about Dumbledore, because Hermione had been thorough in her reading and had assembled a picture of the Hogwarts headmaster that was admiring and slightly cautious in equal measure. "He's brilliant," she said. "That's not in question. Alchemy, transfiguration, magical theory, his published work covers 40 years and most of it is still definitive. He defeated Grindelwald in 1945, which by all accounts was not a comfortable victory." She paused. "But he also has a history of making decisions about people without consulting them. The greater good," she said, with audible quotation marks around it. "He's been making decisions about what's best for Harry Potter since before you could form an opinion on the matter." "I know," Harry said. "The prophecy material, I found the reference, in the records Gringotts sent me. They included everything in the secondary ledger, which had some correspondence from Dumbledore to my parents' solicitor. He'd spent 3 evenings in August reading through the Gringotts documents with the focused calm of someone who has prepared themselves for information and is now simply receiving it. He's had a plan for me. Some version of one, for 10 years. Hermione's eyes were sharp. "Are you angry?" "Not particularly." He thought about it. "He's doing what he thinks is necessary. I disagree with the method, which is that he didn't ask, but I understand the intention. What I'm not going to do is pretend I don't know about it. He'll expect you to be," she chose the word carefully, "more manageable. Not stupid. Just more deferential. To authority. To the story he's written for you." "I know," Harry said again. "That's fine. He can have his version. We'll have ours." Hermione looked at him for a moment, and then she smiled, not the polite smile she used for situations that required it, but the real one, which involved her whole face and which Harry had spent 4 years knowing was a reliable indicator that something important was being confirmed. "Yes," she said. "We will. Ron Weasley knocked on the compartment door at 10:30, which Harry had also expected. He slid it open with the slightly self-conscious energy of someone who has prepared an approach and isn't sure it's the right one. "Everywhere else is full," he said, which was not entirely true. Harry could see 2 empty compartments from where he sat. "Come in," Harry said, because he had decided in August that Ron Weasley deserved a fair assessment unencumbered by the bias of knowing he'd sought them out for their names rather than themselves, and you couldn't assess someone fairly without giving them room to be themselves. Ron came in and took the seat by the window across from Crookshanks, who regarded him with professional suspicion. He had the particular look of someone trying not to stare at a scar and failing rhythmically. "I'm Ron," he said. "Ron Weasley. Harry Potter. This is Hermione Granger." Ron's gaze moved to Hermione and did the recalibration that almost everyone's did. The Veela inheritance wasn't aggressive, but it was present, and people's eyes tended to focus, and their posture adjusted slightly, like plants orienting toward a light source. Ron's adjustment was less calculated than Draco Malfoy's had been, which Harry counted in his favor. "Hi," Ron said. "Hello," Hermione said pleasantly. "Have you been to Hogwarts before?" "Your brothers, 5 brothers," he said, with the resignation of someone repeating a number they've had to explain. "Bill, Charlie, Percy, he's a prefect, and Fred and George are the twins. So yeah, I've been on the grounds a couple times. Never inside properly." He looked at Harry. "Is it true you don't remember anything? From before?" "The night, no," Harry said, uncomplicated about it. "I was 15 months old." "Right. Yeah, of course." He pulled his gaze away from the scar with visible effort. "Sorry. My mum said not to ask about it. Ask what you actually want to know," Harry said. "It's better than everyone carefully not mentioning it." Ron seemed to relax slightly at that. He asked 3 questions over the next 20 minutes, about the Dursleys, about whether Harry could already do magic, about whether Hermione was really Muggle-born, and Harry answered the first 2 directly and Hermione answered the third with a precision that included the distinction between being Muggle-born and having a suppressed magical lineage, delivered without particularly expecting Ron to fully follow it. He didn't fully follow it, but he nodded at the end in good faith, which Harry thought was a reasonable response to complex information you were receiving for the first time. By the time the train was through the London suburbs, they had established the relaxed conversational rhythm of people who have not known each other long enough to be comfortable, but are heading in that direction. Ron's humor was physical and instinctive. He laughed with his whole body and made observations about things he saw with the quick, undirected energy of someone whose brain ran slightly faster than his social filter. Hermione corrected him twice on magical history facts he'd gotten slightly wrong, and he took both corrections with a good-natured "Are you sure?" followed by "Oh yeah, fair enough." That suggested his ego was not, at its base, fragile about being wrong. Harry watched this and was cautiously optimistic. The trolley which came and went. Hermione had packed sandwiches because she had read that the trolley was primarily confectionery, and had made a judgment. Ron had a full box of everything because he had 6 people's experience of this journey telling him what to bring. Harry bought a variety of things from the trolley because he could and because he had spent 10 years not doing so, and because chocolate frogs turned out to contain collectible cards with famous witches and wizards, and he got Dumbledore on his first card, which he showed Hermione, and she said, "Of course you did," with an expression he couldn't entirely interpret. The sky outside darkened in the way it darkened north, faster and more fully than southern England. By the time they changed into robes and the train was pulling into Hogsmeade Station, the night was complete and the castle was lit on the hill in the way things in stories are lit, not for drama, but because that's what they look like, and stories come from real places. Harry looked at it through the window and felt nothing as complex as all. He felt recognized. The boats. Hagrid, enormous, warm, impossible to dislike, and looking at Harry with an affection that was clearly rooted in knowing his parents, which Harry found he didn't mind. The lake was dark and still and the castle reflected in it. "Ya look just like your father," Hagrid said, looking down at Harry from a height that made most things look small. Same face. But you've got your mother's eyes. I've been told, Harry said. You knew them both well? Hagrid's face went briefly soft. Best people I ever knew. Both of them. He cleared his throat. You're okay, Harry? Everything all right? Harry looked up at him. He was big and genuine and worried, and the worry was real in the uncomplicated way that some people's feelings were real, not strategic, not layered, just present. I'm good, Harry said. And meant it, in a way he hadn't been able to mean it with much sincerity for most of his life. Hermione was in the next boat with Ron, who was already talking to the Weasley twins across the water. Harry could feel her, the warm signal of the bond, the way her attention was currently split between the castle and whatever Ron was saying, following both threads with the practiced ease of someone who had learned to read multiple things simultaneously. He turned back to the castle and watched it grow as they crossed. The entrance hall was stone and torchlit, and full of first-years standing in the particular configuration of people who are trying to look as though they're not nervous while being visibly nervous. Professor McGonagall met them, small and precise and clearly spending no emotional energy at all on making anyone feel reassured, which Harry found he respected, and explained the sorting with the economy of someone who has given this speech many times and has trimmed it to its essential content. The sorting hat was not what Harry had expected, which was unusual, because he had been expecting things for most of his life and was generally accurate. He had expected something passive. An object you put on, an answer you received. He had not expected something that looked at you. Not with eyes. With something more uncomfortable than eyes. He was first, of course he was first, because his name was Potter and Hogwarts had been waiting for him. And he sat on the stool and the hat came down over his ears and immediately said, without preamble, "Oh." Not aloud. Inside his head, where it lived for the duration, in a voice like old wood and something dusty and very, very old. You are not what I was told to expect, the hat said. What were you told to expect? Harry thought back. A boy out of his depth. Unsure of himself. Shaped by circumstance into something manageable. A pause. Harry had the impression of something vast and ancient taking a long, slow look at something that surprised it. You are none of those things. No, Harry agreed. Gryffindor, the hat said, and then immediately said wait. Which seemed unlike a hat that had presumably never said wait before. You could go anywhere. I have put Potters in Gryffindor for 6 generations. It is the obvious choice. But you are aware of that. You know about the house system. You've researched the implications. I know Gryffindor is where people expect me, Harry said. I don't especially care about expectations. I care about where I'll be most useful. Most useful for what? For figuring out what's happening in this castle and dealing with it without other people making decisions for me. The hat was quiet for a moment. That's an unusual criterion. I'm an unusual person. Slytherin would give you. I know what Slytherin would give me, Harry said. I've read about the social structure. I'm not interested in operating within a hierarchy I didn't choose. I'm interested in building something I believe in. He paused. Gryffindor. But because I'm choosing it, not because it's what I'm supposed to do. The hat made a sound inside his head that might have been appreciation. You know, I've been doing this for 1,000 years, it said, and I've had perhaps a dozen conversations that actually required both parties. Another pause. Gryffindor it is. And Mr. Potter, yes? He knows you're here. He's been told. Be careful not to mistake care for control. I know the difference, Harry said. Gryffindor! The hat called out, and the Gryffindor table erupted in the enthusiastic noise of people who had been hoping for this, and Harry set the hat back on the stool and walked to the table without particular hurry. He sat near the middle of the table, where he could see the stool and watched the rest of the sorting. He watched not go to Slytherin, which he'd expected. Watched a girl named Lavender Brown go to Gryffindor with the expression of someone receiving a confirmation they'd wanted. Watched Draco Malfoy go to Slytherin the moment the hat touched his head, not even a second, and returned to his table with the composed satisfaction of a result that had never been in doubt. Then Hermione's name. She walked to the stool with her chin up and her back straight, and the particular quality of contained energy that Harry recognized as Hermione deciding to do something thoroughly. She sat. The hat went on. She was under it for 90 seconds, which was longer than anyone else, and during those 90 seconds the Gryffindor table had gone quiet in a way it hadn't for anyone else, and the torches nearest to the sorting stool burned approximately 30% brighter than they had been burning a moment before. Then the hat said, "Gryffindor," and the 30% increase in firelight became a brief, clean flare that lasted half a second and then settled, and Hermione walked to the table with exactly the same stride she'd had going up, which was the stride of someone who had decided and then done, and sat down next to Harry. 90 seconds, he said. It wanted to discuss things, she said. I let it, within reason. Ron landed in Gryffindor 6 names later and made his way to them with the relieved grin of someone whose statistics had held up. He sat across from them, looked at the 2 empty seats beside Harry, and said, "Saved for anyone?" "No," Harry said, and Ron immediately took the one closest to him, which Harry noted as an uncomplicated declaration of where he thought he belonged, and liked him a little better for its lack of calculation. The feast was extraordinary in the way that only food could be extraordinary when you'd spent years eating what was left, which was Harry's experience. Hermione ate with the pragmatic efficiency of someone who had a lot to observe and was not going to let food consumption interfere with it, but he noticed she went back for the roast potatoes twice, and filed this away as relevant data. Percy Weasley arrived at the Gryffindor table midway through the feast to welcome the new students with the energy of someone who had prepared remarks and was mildly disappointed that not everyone was treating them with the gravity they deserved. He told Harry he was welcome to come to him with any questions or concerns, which Harry accepted with a courtesy that was genuine even if the offer was slightly unnecessary. The Weasley twins leaned across the table. "So you're the Harry Potter," said one of them, Fred. Harry was fairly confident. Something about the timing of his observations suggested Fred, gesturing with a chicken leg for emphasis. "I'm a Harry Potter," Harry said. "Presumably the only one." George's grin widened. "Already better than we expected." "We expected," Fred said. "Someone who'd be weird about it. The famous thing. It would be strange to be weird about something you can't control," Harry said. "Most people are," George said. "I'm not most people." "No," Fred said, looking at him with the quick, reading quality that Harry suspected people underestimated about the twins. "You're really not. What are you two planning to do with your educations?" Hermione asked from beside Harry, with the directness of someone who has observed that indirect approaches to the Weasley twins were probably inefficient. They both looked at her. Something shifted slightly in their expression, the Veela inheritance doing its thing, that subtle reorientation, and they adjusted without seeming to notice they were doing it. "As little structured work as possible," Fred said. "And as much practical experimentation as we can manage," George added. "Joke shop," Harry said, and both twins looked at him in mild surprise. "You've got the instincts for it. The product testing alone would be, we're getting there," Fred said, with the pleased confidence of someone whose idea has been correctly identified. "5th year's the target. Enough capital by then to invest in quality materials," George said. "I can help with the chemistry," Hermione said, and then amended, when they both looked at her. "The potion components. If you're doing anything with transformative effects. I want to understand the practical side of advanced brewing, and your products would be useful test cases." The twins exchanged a look. The kind of look that contains an entire conversation in half a second. "We're going to get along," Fred said. "Yes," Hermione agreed, as though this had always been obvious, and went back to her food. Dumbledore's start-of-term speech was warm, witty, and precisely calibrated. Harry could see the calibration, now that he was looking for it. The famous warnings, the third-floor corridor, off-limits and dangerous. said with the light touch of a man who understood that telling curious children not to go somewhere was at least as effective as an invitation, and probably more so, and who had made a decision about that fact that Harry found interesting. He was watching Dumbledore the way he'd learned to watch things, not staring, not pointed, just present and attentive. Dumbledore's gaze traveled the hall the way authority traveled, making its rounds, touching each table. When it reached the Gryffindor table and found Harry, there was a pause. Not long. Half a second. But Harry was looking, and he caught it. And then Dumbledore smiled, the real one, Harry thought, or the closest thing to it, and moved on. Harry looked down at his food and thought, so he knows I'm looking back. Good. Professor McGonagall took the Gryffindors to their dormitory tower, boys one way, girls another, which was how it went, and how it had always gone, and Harry followed the stone staircase up with the measured attention of someone memorizing a route, which he was. Ron fell into step beside him. So, tomorrow. Real classes. Yes, Harry said. Nervous? No, Harry said honestly. You? Little bit, Ron admitted. Mostly about potions. Snape is, everyone says Snape is, I've read about Snape, Harry said. Which was true. The man's reputation in print was consistent, brilliant, demanding, prone to treating students as inconveniences that happened to require teaching. Also, notably, he had loved Harry's mother. Harry had found the reference in his father's letters in the Gringotts documents, and had spent one afternoon thinking about what it meant about people, that you could love someone entirely, and still choose to spend your life making their child uncomfortable because of who the child's father had been. He hadn't reached a conclusion. He'd filed it under complicated. You're really not afraid of anything, are you? Ron said. Less question, more observation. Harry considered. I'm cautious about things I don't understand yet. But that's different from afraid. Ron was quiet for a moment. In our family, being afraid of Snape is basically tradition. Traditions can end, Harry said. Ron laughed, the full-body version, and pushed open the door to the first-year boys' dormitory, which had 4 beds and a view of the grounds that was dark now but would be spectacular in daylight, and smelled like wood polish and something old and stone-deep that Harry thought might just be what safety smelled like when you'd never had enough of it. He made his bed his the way he'd learned to make spaces his at Privet Drive, a book on the nightstand, his trunk positioned with the lid toward the wall so he could open it without blocking the path, Athena's perched by the window where she could come and go. Small things. But they were his. Neville Longbottom was in the dormitory, round-faced and anxious and clearly expecting to be found wanting, with the tightly held quality of someone who had been told enough times that they were disappointing that they'd started to believe it. He reminded Harry, in a way that made him choose his words carefully, of himself 2 years ago. Nice toad, Harry said, because Neville had a toad named Trevor who was sitting on his bed regarding the room with the resigned calm of an animal that had made peace with a chaotic world. Neville blinked like he'd expected something different. Thanks. He gets away a lot. Toads are independent, Harry said. Smart animals, actually. Most people don't know that. Neville blinked again. Really? Colette's notes mentioned them, Hermione said, appearing from nowhere, which meant she'd come up the boys' staircase, which was technically meant to be impossible, a fact that the staircase had apparently not communicated to her successfully. She held a book. Medieval familiars. Colette was very interested in amphibians for some reason. The bonding capacity of a toad is actually, Hermione, Harry said. You can't sleep up here. I'm not sleeping here, she said in the tone of someone who finds the implied concerns slightly irrational. I came to lend you this. She held out the book. Charms Theory. You said you wanted to work ahead. He took the book. The stairs let you up? The stairs tried to turn into a slide, she said. I turned them back. Apparently the enchantment responds to intent. I wasn't intending anything inappropriate, so. She shrugged, which was Hermione's version of the details aren't interesting. She looked at Neville. Neville Longbottom. Your grandmother is Augusta Longbottom. Your father is Frank and your mother is Alice. They're both in St. Mungo's. Neville went still. Yes. They were the best aurists of their generation, Hermione said, simply and directly, in the way she delivered facts that mattered. Before. I wanted you to know that I know that, because people tend not to say it directly. Neville looked at her for a long moment. Then he said quietly, Nobody says it directly. I know, she said. I find that strange. The truth is easier than the careful silence about it. She looked at Harry. I'll see you at breakfast. 7:30, so we can go over the schedule before Transfiguration. 7, Harry said. 7:15. She negotiated. Done. She went back down the stairs, which tried the slide maneuver again and abandoned it. Ron was staring at the door. Dean Thomas, who had been unpacking quietly on the far bed and observing the entire scene with the contained watchfulness of someone who preferred to understand a situation before participating in it, met Harry's eye and raised an eyebrow. Harry shrugged. She's always like that, he said. You get used to it. Is she always like that at 7 in the morning? Ron asked. More so, Harry said. She wakes up already thinking. Terrifying, Ron said admiringly. Efficient, Harry said, and opened the Charms Theory book and read until the candles went out. Transfiguration was first, McGonagall's class, taught by someone who would not countenance either inattention or flattery and who, Harry quickly established, had a precise and demanding mind that responded to actual competence the way a tuning fork responded to its frequency. She transformed her desk into a pig and back before saying a word to them, which was such a clean display of skill that the class fell genuinely silent rather than performatively so. Transfiguration is some of the most complex and dangerous magic taught at Hogwarts, she began, with the economy of someone who has no patience for preamble. Foolish wand-waving does not produce transfiguration. You will be required to think. She set them to turning matchsticks into needles. Harry looked at the matchstick for approximately 10 seconds. He thought about what he knew about molecular structure, which was a topic Hermione had brought up 18 months ago, and he'd read 4 books on out of interest. He thought about what he knew about intention and magical direction from the Charms Theory he'd been reading since June. He thought about the fact that a matchstick and a needle were both thin and pointed and the transformation was therefore fundamentally about material composition and surface properties rather than fundamental shape. He turned his matchstick into a needle on the second attempt. The first attempt had produced something that was half metal and looked confused about it. McGonagall came down the row, stopped, and looked at his needle. She picked it up, examined it, set it down. Where did you study? She said, which was not what teachers usually said to 11-year-olds in their first lesson. Libraries, mostly, Harry said. She looked at him with the expression she reserved for things that required assessment, and continued down the row. He caught, at the edge of her composure, something that was not quite approval, that was too simple, but was the specific quality of a teacher who has just identified that a student is going to make this interesting. Hermione had produced her needle 3 minutes before Harry, which he told her at lunch, and she received with the pleased directness of someone who doesn't think false modesty is a useful quality. She had also corrected Neville's grip on his wand during the class, which McGonagall had observed and not commented on, which was its own kind of comment. Ron had gotten halfway there, which he was satisfied with in the way someone is satisfied when they've confirmed their capabilities run in the predicted direction. Nowhere near you too, he said, without apparent resentment, and then immediately said, But I got further than Seamus and his matchstick tried to catch fire, so. Seamus has a strong pyrokinetic tendency, Hermione said. It'll be useful in specific contexts. It nearly caught his eyebrows. Ron said. Useful in specific contexts, she repeated. Potions was in the dungeons, in the afternoon, and Snape arrived the way weather arrived, a change in atmospheric pressure before the visible phenomenon, the class going quiet by instinct. He was tall and dark and moved with the deliberate precision of someone who had decided long ago that efficiency was a form of contempt for waste. He took the register. He reached Harry's name and paused. "Ah, yes," he said in a voice that was smooth and cool and doing something specific. "Harry Potter." He looked up. "Our new celebrity." Harry looked back at him. He had thought about this moment, since August, in the way he thought about things he expected to be complicated. He said nothing, which was sometimes more effective than anything you could say. Snape held his gaze for a moment. Something moved behind his eyes, something that was not entirely about Harry. Harry was fairly sure that was older than this room and this moment. Then he moved on to the next name. The questions he asked were the kind designed to humiliate through ignorance, rapid fire, technical, aimed at Neville primarily and at Ron as a secondary target. When he reached Harry, he asked about the Bezoar, about the difference between monkshood and wolfsbane, about what a Bezoar was, and Harry answered all three accurately and without inflection because he had read the potions textbook in July and had cross-referenced with 3 supplementary texts. Snape's expression didn't change. Harry hadn't expected it to. When he asked Hermione, he hadn't intended to. Harry could tell from the brief recalibration in his eyes when she raised her hand before the question finished. She answered with a level of detail that technically went beyond the question asked, and Snape said "sufficient," and moved on, which in Snape's apparent vocabulary was the equivalent of applause. After class, in the corridor, Neville said quietly to Harry, "Thank you for earlier." In the dormitory, Harry looked at him. "I didn't do much. Hermione said something true that people don't say." He paused. "You did too. About Trevor." He held the toad up slightly, by way of illustration. Trevor looked at Harry with the calm of someone who had decided to be unimpressed by the world and was maintaining it. "Good animal," Harry said. "Genuinely." Neville almost smiled, which on his face looked like a door opening about an inch wider than it had been. Harry filed it away in the part of him that was tracking the distance between what people were and what they'd been told to be, and thought, give him time. The evening common room was full of the particular energy of first days, assessments being made, territories being established, the whole elaborate social architecture of children trying to work out where they stood. Harry sat in one of the window seats with the charms theory, watching it peripherally. Draco Malfoy's name came up twice, from Parvati Patil, who had the sharp political instinct of someone who paid attention to family names, and from Fred Weasley, who was explaining the Malfoy family to 2 second years with the particular flavor of Weasley commentary that was funny enough to land while being fundamentally accurate. Harry didn't contribute. He didn't need to. Hermione had commandeered a table near the fireplace and was organizing her timetable with the methodology of someone planning a campaign, which was essentially what she was doing. She had 3 different colored quills and a system that Harry understood at a glance, and Ron, who had drifted over to look, did not understand at any glance. "Why is charms in green?" Ron asked. "Because it shares practical mechanics with, it doesn't matter," Hermione said in the voice of someone who has decided the explanation requires prerequisites. "The point is I know where everything is." "I'll take your word for it," Ron said, with the good nature of someone who has decided to trust the competence of others in areas they don't share. Harry looked up from his book. Ron was looking at Hermione's timetable with an expression that was working through something, not resentment, not exactly, but a kind of recalibration that Harry recognized. It was the look of someone understanding that the baseline they'd assumed was not the actual baseline. Good. Later, when the common room had thinned to a few older students, Harry put his book down and looked at the fire. The day had been, not what he'd expected, because he'd expected it pretty accurately, and it had largely conformed, but it had been more than he'd expected in the way that living things were always more than you'd expected them to be. He'd expected a castle. He'd found one that recognized him. He'd expected teachers. He'd found people who were doing something specific with their lives, one of whom was an old man who had plans for him, one of whom was a complicated person who had loved his mother and taken it out on his shadow, and one of whom had looked at his needle with something very close to delight. He'd expected the beginning. He'd found that the beginning felt, surprisingly, like the middle of something that had been going on for a while. Hermione came and sat in the window seat across from him, Crookshanks settling onto the ledge behind her head. The castle outside was lit up against the dark Scottish sky, and the grounds were silver where the moon found them. "First day," she said. "First day," he agreed. "McGonagall is going to be important," she said. "She genuinely respects competence. No politics in it. Snape is going to be complicated," he said. "Snape is going to be watching you," she said. "Not the way Dumbledore is. More," she searched. "More personally. He's carrying something about your parents, and it doesn't fit anywhere clean." "I know." Harry looked out at the grounds. "I'm not going to make it worse." "No," she said. "But don't let him make it worse either." He looked at her. "I won't." She nodded, and pulled her feet up onto the window seat, and opened her astronomy text, and they sat in the firelit quiet of the Gryffindor common room on the first evening of the rest of their lives, and Harry felt something he had felt very few times and always recognized immediately. He felt exactly where he was supposed to be. Chapter 4: Fire in the Curriculum. October arrived like someone had thrown a switch. The warmth of September folded away overnight, and the Scottish Highlands came into their own, wide off the lake that had teeth in it, morning frost on the castle windows, the sky a specific shade of iron gray that Harry found he liked in the way he liked most things that were honest about what they were. He had settled into Hogwarts the way water settled into a space, completely, finding all the corners. He knew the castle's rhythms by the third week, which staircases moved in when, which portraits were worth talking to, which classrooms had windows that caught the afternoon light and were therefore better to study in, which parts of the grounds the groundskeeper Hagrid covered in the early morning and which were technically unwatched between 7 and 8 if you needed to think without being supervised. He used that window twice a week, in the hour before breakfast, to practice. Not the curriculum. He kept up with the curriculum in his sleep, not dismissively, he was genuinely interested in it. But the first-year work was the equivalent of the children's section of the library, and he had outgrown the children's section 4 years ago. What he practiced in the early morning was the work he'd been doing in private since August, wand work that ran ahead of the syllabus in ways that would have given McGonagall's eyebrow a genuine workout, and the other thing, the bond-adjacent thing that he and Hermione had been quietly mapping since they were 9 years old. She joined him on Tuesdays and Thursdays, which had a symmetry that neither of them mentioned because it didn't need to be mentioned. They'd established a shorthand, she pushed the theoretical edges, he pushed the practical ones, and they met somewhere in the middle that was further than either of them could get alone. She would describe the mechanics of a spell from first principles with the precision of someone who had memorized the underlying magical theory, and he would try it, and then try it differently, and eventually they would arrive at something that worked in a way the textbook hadn't quite predicted. He never told her she was brilliant, because she already knew it and didn't need it from him, and because the specific thing she needed from him was someone who took her seriously enough not to perform appreciation. He simply built on what she gave him and gave it back better, and she did the same, and that was its own kind of acknowledgement. On a Tuesday in the second week of October, they were working on Wingardium Leviosa, not the basic version, which they'd both done correctly on day 1, but the sustained precision version, holding multiple objects at altitude while modifying speed and trajectory independently. Harry had 4 stones from the lake suspended at different heights, moving in patterns that technically had no business being achievable with a first-year charm. He was not thinking about it very hard, which was the point. The thinking hard stage of any spell was the stage where you were learning it. Once he learned it, he moved it back into a part of his mind that ran without his conscious supervision, which freed his attention for the layer above. "The rotational velocity on the third one," Hermione said, watching from the log she'd turned into a more comfortable seat 3 weeks ago with a transfiguration that McGonagall had not yet technically taught but which she had independently derived from first principles. "You're compensating with your wrist." "I know," he said. "It's a habit from the initial learning. I'm working it out. Try thinking of it as a current rather than a force." He did. The third stone smoothed out. "There," she said, with the satisfaction of someone whose model has been confirmed. He brought all 4 stones down, and turned to look at her. She was in her school robes with her scarf wound twice around because she ran cold in the mornings, and she had her notebook on her knee and her vinewood wand tucked behind her ear, and Crookshanks was somewhere in the long grass behind her doing whatever Crookshanks did, which involved a lot of autonomous investigation and very little concern for being supervised. "I've been thinking about the third floor," Harry said. Hermione looked up from her notes. "I thought you might be. Dumbledore told 11-year-olds not to go there," he said. "Which is either a very poor security strategy or a very deliberate one. He wants something to happen," she said. It wasn't a question. She'd been thinking this since the feast. "Not specifically us. But he's set up a situation. Something's being protected up there. Someone's going to find it. He's calculated that whoever finds it will be someone capable of getting through the protections," Harry said. "Which means the protections are designed to let the right person through. Or to let the wrong person fail in a contained environment. Or both," Harry said. "Probably both." He looked up at the castle's north tower. "There's a dog." She stared at him. "What?" "Three-headed. I could smell it when I went past the door last week. I was careful," he added before she could say it. "I wasn't about to open a door that smells like that with nothing but a Wingardium Leviosa and 7 weeks of schooling." "Three-headed dog," she said slowly. "That's a Cerberus. Greek mythology, guard of the underworld. The original myths say it can be pacified by music." She was already reaching for her notebook. "Which means Dumbledore is specifically using a creature with a classical vulnerability that could be researched by a competent student." "Competent student," Harry said. "Very subtle," she said. "It's almost insulting," he said mildly. "Using something that can be bypassed by someone who's read mythology. He's not expecting someone who read mythology at 7, she said. He's expecting a student who's clever enough to find the key eventually. After enough time for..." She paused, thinking it through. "Whatever timeline he's operating on. There's something in the school that Voldemort wants," Harry said. It came out matter-of-fact because it was. He'd been assembling this since September, piece by piece. The increased Gringotts security he'd read about in the Leaky Cauldron's discarded newspaper on September 1st, the rumor in the upper years about a break-in at Gringotts, a specific vault, emptied the same day Harry and Hermione had been in Diagon Alley. The vault at Gringotts that was broken into on July 31st. "I made the same connection," Hermione said. "Whatever they were storing there is now in this building. And Voldemort is going to come for it," Harry said. "This year." She was quiet for a moment. The lake wind moved through the long grass and carried with it the smell of the water and the coming cold. "Quirrell," she said. He nodded. He'd been watching Quirrell since the 3rd week. The Defense Against the Dark Arts professor had a stutter and a nervous manner and a turban that smelled wrong, not just the garlic, which was its own peculiarity, but something underneath that Harry had been trying to identify for a month. Something cold. Something that didn't match the rest of the man. "He's not alone in his own skin," Harry said. "That's the best way I can put it. There's something wrong with the back of his head." Hermione looked at him steadily. "You can feel that?" "I can feel the wrongness of it," he said. "Like, you know how the bond feels warm? This feels like the opposite. A cold spot walking around in the shape of a person." She wrote something in her notebook. "Dual consciousness in a living host," she said half to herself. "The magical resonance would be, it must be extremely uncomfortable for both parties." "I don't feel sorry for him," Harry said. "No," she agreed. "That's not the point. The point is understanding what we're dealing with." She looked up. "We need to know what's being protected. Not because we're going to do anything about it immediately. Because we need to understand the full board before anything moves." Harry nodded. "I'll talk to Hagrid." "Casually," she said. "I'm capable of casual," he said. She gave him the look that this statement deserved. "I'll be careful," he amended. Hagrid was always happy to see Harry, which made conversations with him simultaneously easy and requiring of some navigation, because Hagrid's happiness tended to express itself as enthusiasm that occasionally disclosed more than intended. Harry had lunch with him twice in September on the grounds that he was genuinely fond of Hagrid and also that Hagrid was a reliable source of information he didn't realize he was giving. He brought Ron this time, because Ron and Hagrid had an existing rapport from Ron's childhood visits with his family, and because having Ron there made the visit look social rather than investigative, which it was both of. Hagrid made tea and served it with rock cakes that Harry had learned to regard as architectural rather than culinary achievements, and declined politely. Hagrid, Ron said, around a rock cake he was managing with the practiced jaw strength of someone who'd had them before. "Do you know what's being kept up on the 3rd floor?" Harry looked at Ron. Ron looked back with the satisfied expression of someone who had decided the direct approach was faster, and had simply gone for it. Harry revised several things about Ron Weasley in that moment. Hagrid went very carefully casual. "Can't say," he said, which was different from "I don't know," which Harry noted. "Hogwarts business. Professor Dumbledore's business." "Is it the thing from Gringotts?" Harry asked. Directly, because Ron had established that as the register of the conversation, and it would be strange to step back from it now. Hagrid's enormous hands went still around his mug. "Where'd you hear about that?" "Leaky Cauldron, 1st of September," Harry said. "The Daily Prophet. Vault 713 emptied. Same day Hermione and I were in Diagon Alley." He paused. The timing made sense. Hagrid looked at him. Then he looked at the ceiling in the way people looked at the ceiling when they were having a private conversation with their own judgment about how much to say. "The stone," he said finally, quietly, in the way someone says something when they've decided that the person in front of them can handle the information. "Don asked me more than that. It's not my place. But I'll tell you." He leaned slightly forward, lowering his voice to a register that was still technically audible from the grounds. "It's very well protected. Takes more than one person to get through. Even a very clever person." "More than one," Harry repeated. "Different kinds of." Hagrid stopped. Cleared his throat. "That's all I'm saying." Harry met Ron's eyes across the table. Ron's were bright with the particular energy of someone who has stumbled into something more interesting than they expected and is fully committed. "Thanks, Hagrid," Harry said. "For the tea." "Any time, Harry. Any time." Hagrid looked at him with the affection that was always slightly sad around the edges when directed at Harry, because it carried within it everything it remembered. "You're looking well, you know. Happy. Your mum would've." He stopped, cleared his throat again. "She'd be pleased." Harry held that for a moment. "Thanks, Hagrid," he said again, and meant it in a different direction than the first time. The troll on Halloween was not a surprise. Not entirely. He hadn't known it would be a troll, specifically, but he had known since the 3rd week that Quirrell was building towards something. The cold wrong feeling was growing, sharpening, the way pressure built before weather. He'd told Hermione in October that whatever Quirrell was planning would accelerate. She'd agreed and had been watching the Dada classroom for patterns. What he hadn't predicted was Hermione being in the bathroom. She had gone there after charms because Ron, in a moment of particular thoughtlessness, had repeated something Parvati had said within earshot of Hermione, that she was a nightmare, that no one could stand her, and she had left the class with her chin up and her jaw set in the way that meant she was containing something she didn't want to show publicly. Harry had watched her go and had stayed because leaving would have drawn attention she didn't want, but he had spent the rest of the lesson tracking the warmth of the bond and calibrating it, and by the time the feast started he knew she was distressed in the specific, suppressed way she was when something had confirmed a fear she'd been managing. He was going to go find her after the feast started. He didn't get the chance. Quirrell burst into the great hall with the performance of someone who has been practicing the announcement in the way that indicated it was not entirely spontaneous, too composed for real terror, the stutter slightly too consistent, and said there was a mountain troll in the dungeons, and the hall erupted, and Harry was already standing. "She's in the girls' bathroom on the 1st floor," he said to Ron, low and clear, and Ron was up before the sentence was finished. They went against the flow of the student tide. The stream of students being marshaled to their dormitories created a current they moved through rather than with, and the teachers were directing traffic at the main staircase junction, and Harry and Ron simply went a different way, through the back corridor that Harry had mapped in September for exactly this kind of necessity. Harry felt Hermione through the bond, not pain, not yet, but the specific quality of awareness that came before something happened, that particular sharpening of animal attention that the body produced when it registered a threat the mind hadn't fully processed. He pushed the bathroom door open and the troll was there. It was enormous in the way things were enormous when they displaced a meaningful volume of space. 12 feet of gray-green muscle, and something that might have been a head if the requirements for a head were minimal. It had a club the size of a small tree, and it was using it with the indiscriminate enthusiasm of something that had encountered walls before and not been impressed. The bathroom had been losing the argument for some time. 3 stalls were already rubble. Hermione was backed against the far wall, not frozen. She had her wand out, and her eyes were tracking the troll's movements with the focus of someone doing rapid tactical assessment. But the bathroom was small enough that her options were constrained. She looked up when the door opened. The look on her face lasted 1/10 of a second, relief, then immediate replacement with the alert, present attention that meant she'd shifted into the next phase. The nostrils, Harry said, because he had been thinking on the way here. They're extremely sensitive. Everything is sensitive on something that size. I know, she said, which meant she'd already arrived at the same conclusion and was working on delivery. She was already moving to one side, drawing the troll's attention with her movement, because it was tracking motion more than sound. Harry moved the other way. The troll turned back. Hermione moved. The troll turned again. Ron, Harry said without looking back. Get to the other side. Ron, to his considerable credit, did not ask why. He went. Harry looked at the troll's club and then up at the troll's reaching arm and made a quick decision that was less decision and more instinct completed before the thinking caught up. He cast Wingardium Leviosa on the club, not the club, exactly, but the troll's grip on the club, with the sustained precision he'd been practicing at 6 in the morning by the lake, and the club came up and the troll's arm came up with it, off balance, and the troll stumbled sideways with the affronted expression of something that has never been contradicted by physics before. Ron shouted something. It was Wingardium Leviosa, not as clean as Harry's but loud and committed, and aimed at a chunk of rubble from the broken stalls that flew up and connected with the back of the troll's knee with more mass than the spell was technically designed to propel. The troll went down. Not gently. The bathroom floor registered its objections in the form of several new structural issues. The troll was not unconscious. But it was reconsidering its position. Hermione was beside Harry before the dust settled, and he turned to look at her, and she looked back and neither of them said anything, because the bond said it, the warm certainty of you're here, we're fine, we handled it, and then she did something she'd never done before, she put her arms around him for 3 seconds, quick and fierce, and he put his arm around her and felt the Veela warmth of it like a door opened into a lit room. And then she let go and stepped back and her chin was up. And her expression was composed. Ron was staring at both of them with the look of someone witnessing a language he'd been told was theoretical, and is now hearing spoken fluently. McGonagall arrived with Snape and Quirrell 30 seconds later. McGonagall's expression processed the troll, the rubble, and the 3 first years in rapid sequence, and became something specific and carved. Can somebody tell me, she said, with the controlled precision of great restraint, what happened here? Troll, Harry said. We handled it. I can see that, Potter. She looked at the troll, which was showing the early signs of having decided that lying still was the better part of valor. What you cannot imagine, apparently, is that this was considerably more dangerous than we handled it, Harry said again. Not rudely. Just factually. A silence. Snape was watching him. Quirrell was watching the troll, and there was something in the quality of Quirrell's watching that Harry noted and filed. 10 points, McGonagall said, as though arriving at a verdict she wasn't entirely comfortable with. To each of you. For clear thinking in a crisis. A pause. And 5 points from Gryffindor, each, for being out of the dormitory. Another pause. See me in the morning, she said to Harry and Hermione specifically, and the look she gave them was the look of a teacher who is beginning to understand that a specific pair of students is going to require a different mode of engagement. Quirrell was still looking at the troll with that specific quality of attention. Harry watched him in return and felt the cold wrong thing pulse once, like a heartbeat that wasn't Quirrell's. November. The work continued to accelerate, because Harry had decided that waiting for the curriculum to become relevant was less useful than acquiring what he needed before he needed it. Hermione agreed. They worked every morning and read every evening and attended every class with the dual focus of people who are genuinely interested in learning and also mapping the terrain. Ron became, by a process of proximity and consistency and the fact that he turned out to be excellent at chess in a way that revealed a tactical mind he hadn't been given much structured space to develop, their closest friend. He was not as academically oriented as Harry or Hermione, which was a distinction rather than a deficiency. He absorbed things differently, practically, through doing rather than reading, and he understood social dynamics with an instinctive accuracy that Harry found useful and Hermione found occasionally baffling. You can't just tell Neville he's doing the spell wrong, Ron said to Hermione, after she'd corrected Neville's wand grip 3 times in defense against the dark arts in a row. He is doing it wrong, she said. That's why I'm telling him. Yeah, but... Ron made a gesture that encompassed the complex social architecture of but. Ask him if he needs help first. He's not going to tell you if he does because he doesn't want to look like he needs help. She said it flatly, like she found this irrational. Most people feel like that, Ron said patiently. That's counterproductive, she said. Most people are counterproductive, Ron said, and Harry laughed, and Hermione looked between them with the expression of someone who has been outvoted on something and is revising their position with good grace, which for Hermione involved a 2-second pause and then a slight nod. She asked Neville next time? He said yes. She helped. He got it right on the 4th try and looked at his wand like it had said something surprising. Neville was becoming, in the way people became things when they were given consistent room to be them, more than he'd started as. He still mishandled potions. Snape's dungeon had a particular effect on him, a kind of contracted quality, as though he'd learned to make himself small in that room specifically, but outside it he had begun to unfold slightly, in the way things unfold when the weight pressing them down is occasionally removed. He and Harry had long conversations about herbology, which was the one area where Neville was incandescent and knew it, and Harry listened to these conversations the way he listened to everything he hadn't already known, which was with complete attention and without any impulse to redirect. Snape remained complicated. He was genuinely a brilliant potions master. Harry didn't like him and had no reason to pretend otherwise, but he wasn't going to let dislike interfere with the quality of information available to him, and Snape's classroom, underneath the atmosphere of deliberate menace, contained genuinely excellent instruction. He had figured out, by October, how to be present and attentive in Snape's class without triggering the specific antagonism Snape seemed to direct at students who were either visibly confident or visibly struggling. He occupied a middle register that was either. Hermione found this more difficult. She was constitutionally incapable of being anything other than completely engaged, and complete engagement in Snape's class expressed itself as raised hand and precise answer, which Snape acknowledged with the minimum possible warmth, and occasionally undermined. Harry watched this and understood that Snape was managing something that had nothing to do with her, and on the 3rd occasion he said, evenly, into the silence after Snape's dismissal of her answer, "The principle she's describing is from Libatius Borgia's 7th edition. Page 312. Snape turned. Slowly, with the precision of a man deciding how to respond to a variable he hadn't anticipated. Correct, Potter, he said in a voice like ice on stone. Remarkably well read for someone raised by muggles. Libraries, Harry said pleasantly for the 2nd time in his academic career. A long moment. The class held very still, The way classes held still when two people were in the middle of something that wasn't quite a confrontation but was in the neighborhood. Snape moved on. He did not change. But he never dismissed Hermione's answers without engagement again, which Harry thought was the most they were going to get, and accepted it as sufficient. December arrived, and with it Quidditch practice in conditions that McGonagall clearly considered appropriate for building character, Slytherin's point lead narrowing slightly as Gryffindor found its collective rhythm, and the examination schedule for first-term assessments, which Harry reviewed in 30 seconds and set aside. He had been flying since October, which deserved a separate accounting. He had gotten on a broomstick during the first flying lesson, felt the way it responded to intent rather than instruction, understood in approximately 4 seconds that this was the thing his magic had been built for in a specific way, not the only thing, but the thing that felt like speaking in your native language after years of careful translation. He flew the way he did everything once he learned it, without conscious supervision, which meant he flew with a naturalness that the flying instructor Madame Hooch had clocked on the first lesson and reported to McGonagall, who had then installed him as Gryffindor's seeker with the efficiency of someone acting on reliable intelligence. He was 11. The youngest house player in a century, which he'd been informed of and had found mildly interesting as a fact and unimportant as a consideration. He played because the flying was the thing itself, complete and satisfying. Whether or not it translated into winning Quidditch matches was a secondary consequence. He was very good at it. Objectively. The snitch, when it was in the air with him, was a conversation between two fast things, and Harry spoke that language without effort. Hermione attended his practices with her notebook, which several of his teammates found eccentric, and which Harry found useful, because she tracked patterns he couldn't see from inside them. After his third practice she told him that his seeker style had a specific weakness in his left side peripheral response time, and what to do about it, and he spent a week working on it, and then didn't have it anymore. "You don't need to attend my Quidditch practice," he told her once, meaning, you don't have to if you don't want to. "I know," she said. "I find the aerodynamics interesting." A pause. "Also, I like watching you fly." He looked at her. She was writing in her notebook and not looking at him, which was fine because he needed a moment to put his expression back where he kept it. "I like that you're there," he said. She made a small sound that could have been acknowledgement, and kept writing, and the warmth between them was the warmth of the bond and also the warmth of something else, something they had been circling for a long time without naming, because they were 11 and also because some things don't need naming yet to be entirely real. The Gryffindor-Slytherin Quidditch match in November. He had spotted the snitch in the 7th minute, hanging in the air 20 meters above the Slytherin goalpost, like a gold punctuation mark. He'd gone for it, and the Slytherin seeker, Terence Higgs, had seen him go and matched his trajectory. Higgs was older, faster on a better broom, and had 2 years of experience over Harry's 2 months. Harry was aware of all 3 of these things and adjusted his line accordingly. Not the direct route to the snitch, but the one that forced Higgs's broom into its least efficient angle, the one that required Higgs to compensate with his technique rather than his equipment advantage. He caught the snitch between 2.5 seconds and 3 seconds before Higgs would have been in position to do the same. The roar from the stands had a specific quality that he registered and filed and didn't engage with emotionally, not because he was performing modesty but because the game itself was already complete to him, and the audience's response to it was separate from the thing. He landed. Held the snitch up. The Gryffindor team descended on him in the happy chaos of people who have been waiting to win something. In the stands, he could feel Hermione's satisfaction, warm and specific, like sunlight on the back of his neck. The thing that happened in December, the thing Harry had not entirely predicted despite having predicted most of it, was the mirror. He found it on a Thursday night. Or rather, Peeves and a complicated sequence of events involving a midnight bathroom trip and a castle corridor that had rearranged itself while he wasn't paying attention, led him to a room in the back of the 4th floor that hadn't been on any map he'd seen. The mirror of Ariste stood in the center of it as though it had been waiting there for a specific visitor, tall and ornate and framed with script that ran around the top edge. Ariste stra eru oit ube kafra oit on wosi. He read it immediately and reversed it immediately because it was an obvious cipher, and then he looked into the mirror. He had been thinking, on the way there, about the stone and Quirrell and the timeline he and Hermione had been building. He had been thinking about his parents, not with grief exactly, but with the particular quality of contemplation he gave to things he couldn't fully know. He had been thinking about the bond and the future, and what he wanted from it. The mirror showed him standing in a room full of light, and Hermione was there, and she was laughing at something he'd said with the full-face laugh that happened when her guard was entirely down, and there were people around them that he didn't recognize in detail but recognized in quality, the quality of people who were there by choice rather than obligation. There was no scar and no prophecy and no cold wrong thing waiting in the castle somewhere above him. There was just a life. His. He stood there for a long time. Not because it was addictive, but because it was clarifying. He heard footsteps behind him and turned without particular alarm. Dumbledore came through the door with the unhurried calm of someone who has timed an arrival carefully and wants it to seem accidental. "Harry," he said pleasantly. "Couldn't sleep either?" "I sleep fine," Harry said. "I was exploring." Something moved in Dumbledore's expression, a recalibration, small but visible to someone who had been watching for it. He looked at the mirror. Then at Harry. "What do you see?" he asked. Harry considered lying. He considered deflecting. He did neither, because both required more energy than the truth, and the truth was interesting enough to be worth offering. "A life that's mine," Harry said. "Not complicated." Dumbledore was quiet for a moment, looking at him with those extraordinarily blue eyes that Harry had read about and found, in person, exactly as sharp as reported. There was intelligence behind them that was genuine and considerable. There was also something else, something that was adjusting, recalculating, with the small tells of a man whose model has just been given data it didn't have. "The mirror shows us our deepest desire," Dumbledore said, settling into a chair that hadn't been there a moment ago. "Men have wasted away before it. Gone mad. It is not a pleasant thing, always, to know what you most want." "I don't think it's unpleasant to want a life that's yours," Harry said. "That seems like a reasonable thing to want." "No," Dumbledore said, after a pause. "It does." He looked at Harry steadily. "You're not what I expected, Harry." "People keep saying that," Harry said. "I've been myself the whole time, so I'm not sure what they were expecting." The corner of Dumbledore's mouth moved. Not quite a smile. "Someone easier," he said, which was what Draco Malfoy had said, and the echo was interesting enough that Harry stored it. "I know," Harry said. "What's the stone, Professor?" The blue eyes didn't widen. He had himself too well in hand for that. But the recalculation happened visibly, and Harry waited while it completed. "Who told you about?" Dumbledore began. "Nobody told me what it is," Harry said. "Hagrid told me there was something here. I worked out the rest from the Gringotts news and from the fact that Quirrell is not entirely Quirrell." He held Dumbledore's gaze. "The Philosopher's Stone. Nicholas Flamel. I've known about Flamel since November when Hermione found the reference in a library book." Another silence. Different quality from the others. "You've been investigating," Dumbledore said. "I've been paying attention," Harry corrected. "There's a difference. You put the stone here with protections designed to be overcome. You're using this castle as a trap, and me as one of the components of the trap." He said it without anger, not because he wasn't frustrated, but because frustration without purpose was inefficient. "I'd prefer to be a component who knows they're a component." Dumbledore looked at him for a long, considered moment. The fire crackled somewhere behind the mirror. Outside the window the December night was full of cold stars. "The stone must not reach Voldemort," Dumbledore said finally. Directly. Which Harry thought was a choice, a decision made in real time in response to what he was dealing with. "I know," Harry said. "It won't." "You're 11 years old," Dumbledore said. Not dismissively. More like he was reminding himself of a fact he found remarkable. You were younger when you made your first major decision about the greater good, Harry said. I've read your early papers. You were 15 when you began corresponding with Grindelwald. The silence that followed was the longest yet. Then Dumbledore laughed, a real one, not the warm public version, but something shorter and more private, the sound of a man being genuinely surprised. Mirrors, he said, have a habit of showing us things we'd rather examine in private. He stood, and the chair vanished. He looked at Harry with something that was not quite an apology and not quite respect, but existed somewhere in the geography between them. Don't come back to this room, Harry. That's not a command. It's genuine advice. The mirror will not help you with what's coming. What's already in you will. He left. Harry looked at the mirror one more time. The version of him standing in the light looked back with the easy certainty of someone who has already sorted out the important questions. He turned and walked back toward Gryffindor Tower. He knew what was in the castle. He knew who had it. He knew when it was going to move. He needed to talk to Hermione. She was awake, because she was always awake when he was thinking hard about something difficult. The bond carried the quality of it even in sleep, and she told him in October that she'd started keeping a notebook by her bed for exactly this reason. He tapped the knocker on the portrait entrance. The fat lady gave him the look she gave anyone who arrived after midnight and swung open. Hermione was already on the stairs, Crookshanks at her heels, notebook in hand. Mirror, he said. And Dumbledore? She said. And Dumbledore. Tell me everything, she said, and they sat by the dying common room fire, the castle quiet around them, and Harry told her everything, and she listened with the focused attention she gave to things she'd been thinking about for months and was now receiving the final pieces of, and when he finished she was quiet for a full 30 seconds. He knows we know, she said. He knows, Harry confirmed. And Quirrell is going to move soon, she said. December, January at the latest. Voldemort will push for it. I think Christmas, Harry said. When the school is emptiest. She nodded slowly. Then she looked at him. We're not going to wait for it to happen to us. No, Harry said. We're going to go through those protections and we're going to understand the situation completely, before Quirrell makes his move. Together, she said. Together, he confirmed. And Ron, he added, because Ron had, over the course of 4 months, proven himself in ways that mattered. She nodded again. I'll tell you what I know about the protections. McGonagall does transfiguration-based security. Snape does potions logic. Sprout likely did something with plants. Flitwick charms work. And the dog. The dog we handle with music, Harry said. I've been practicing a specific melody since October. She looked at him. You have. I told you I was thinking about it. You didn't tell me you'd been preparing for it. I didn't want to alarm you, he said. She made a face that contained an entire argument she was choosing not to have at midnight. We'll go before Christmas, she said. Before Quirrell does. Before Christmas. He agreed. They sat there for another few minutes, the fire burning low, the tower quiet around them, the castle keeping its secrets in the dark above. Then Hermione said quietly, almost to herself, Dumbledore said what's already in you will be enough. He did, Harry said. She looked at him, and the firelight caught her expression at the angle where everything she was thinking was visible for a moment, the fire underneath and the certainty and the something else, the thing they'd been circling for months. He's right, she said. For what it's worth. It's worth quite a lot, Harry said honestly. From you specifically. She looked at the fire. The color in her face might have been firelight. Get some sleep, she said. We have potions in the morning. You get some sleep, he said. I'm already awake. She stood, collected Crookshanks, and went toward the girls' staircase. At the bottom she paused and looked back. Harry, she said. For what it's worth from you specifically, what you said to Dumbledore. About wanting a life that's yours. A pause. I want that too. I know, he said. We'll make it. She nodded once, decisive, the way she nodded when something was settled, and went upstairs. Harry sat by the fire alone for a while longer, thinking about what was coming and what was already in him, and what the mirror had shown him, and found that none of it was frightening in the way he suspected it was supposed to be. He was ready. They were ready. All that was left was the doing of it. Chapter 5. The War Beneath the School. They went on the 19th of December. Not because it was the perfect time, but because Harry felt the cold things shift 3 days before Christmas break and understood from the quality of its movement that Quirrell had been given a deadline. The sensation was distinct enough that he woke at 4 in the morning on the 18th with the certainty of it already formed, like a conclusion his sleeping mind had been working toward all night. He wrote 2 sentences on a scrap of parchment, and sent it to Hermione via the string and police system they'd engineered between the tower windows in October, which the castle had tolerated with the passive acceptance of a building that had seen stranger things. Tomorrow night. It's moving. Her reply came back in 4 minutes, which told him she'd also been awake. I know. We're ready. They spent the 18th in the ordinary rhythm of the last day before Christmas break. Lessons, meals, the common room filling with the slightly manic energy of students about to go home. Harry packed his trunk with the calm of someone who had already decided the important things. Ron helped and didn't ask questions, which was how Harry knew Ron had been paying attention all semester. In the evening, Harry told him. Not everything. The essential structure, the stone was real, Quirrell was compromised, they were going tonight. Ron was quiet for exactly 3 seconds. Then, right. What do I do? Harry looked at him. Ron looked back with the steady, uncomplicated readiness of someone who had decided where he stood a long time ago, and was simply waiting for the moment to be relevant. Chess, Harry said. There's a chess board in there. McGonagall's Transfiguration, she'd used something she trusted. Wizard chess is her game. I've watched her play at the staff table. Ron absorbed this. I can beat her board, he said without bravado. Just assessment. I'll need to think it through. How long do we have? An hour before Quirrell moves. Maybe less. Ron nodded. Get Hermione. I need to work out the position. Harry went to the bottom of the girls' staircase and said Hermione's name once. She appeared in 11 seconds with her bag already packed and Crookshanks regarding the midnight common room with professional approval from his position on her shoulder. Ron's solving the chessboard, Harry told her. We'll need you for the potions logic. Snape's work, she said, already moving. I've been thinking about the structure since September. It'll be a riddle-based selection system. He'd never use a brute force solution, too inelegant. There'll be a set of bottles and a logic problem, which you'll solve in 30 seconds, Harry said. Less, she said honestly. They went back to Ron, who had found a corner of the common room and was sitting with a piece of parchment and a quill, mapping positions in the rapid shorthand of someone who thought in 3-dimensional space when it came to this particular problem. His hand was moving with a confidence Harry recognized as the confidence of genuine competence, not performed, not questioned, just present. I've got it, Ron said 10 minutes later. He looked up. There's a force mate in 7 moves, but I'll need to play white and sacrifice the queen. Once the path's clear, you go through. Don't stop to help me. Ron, Harry started. Don't, Ron said evenly. This is the part one can do better than you. Let me do it. He looked at Hermione, then at Harry. What's through the chess board? Snape's potions riddle, Hermione said. Then the final chamber. Then whatever Quirrell has waiting, Harry finished. Ron nodded once, the way Harry nodded when something was settled. Let's go. They used the invisibility cloak for the corridors, Harry's, which had been in the Gringotts' secondary vault, and which Dumbledore had, Harry suspected, arranged to arrive at some point as part of his plan. Harry had collected it in November, and had never mentioned it to Dumbledore, which felt like an appropriate balance. The castle at night was a different country. The torches burned low, and the portraits slept, and the stone had a quality that was more honest in the dark, the age of it more present. Harry moved through it with the ease of 4 months of memorization, the route from Gryffindor Tower to the third-floor corridor as familiar as the route from the library to the Chiswick Tube station had been 4 years ago. The third-floor corridor door was unlocked, which told Harry that Quirrell had already been through it tonight and had not yet come back, which told him the timeline was tighter than he'd estimated. He pushed the door open. The Cerberus, Fluffy, Hagrid called it, with the affectionate irrationality of someone for whom large and dangerous were categories that didn't preclude beloved, filled the room in the way that very large things filled rooms, as a weather event rather than an object. 3 heads, 3 sets of eyes, 3 separate threat assessments happening simultaneously. The smell was enormous. The sound of its breathing was like wine through a chimney. 2 of the 3 heads were already listing. The third came up sharp when they entered. Harry pulled the small instrument from his pocket. He'd found it in a music shop in Hogsmeade on the first Hogsmeade trip the older students had been given, which he'd attached himself to by the simple method of looking like he knew where he was going. It was a small wooden pipe, nothing formal, something he'd spent 3 weeks learning a specific melody on. He played it. The melody was not technically challenging. It was specific. A particular sequence of intervals that hit something neurological in creatures with the Cerberus's heritage, the same way the mythological harp playing had worked, not magic exactly but the application of knowledge about biology to a practical problem. The third head went down within 8 bars. The room filled with the improbable sound of a building-sized dog snoring. Ron lifted the trapdoor. They dropped through. The devil's snare was below, Sprout's work, unmistakably. A mass of dark tendrils that immediately began the instinctive constriction of a plant doing what plants did in the presence of warmth and movement. Harry had read about Devil's Snare in September. He held still, which was the first rule, and looked at Hermione. She had her wand up and was already casting. The Lumos was not the standard Lumos. She'd been working on the sustained luminosity version for a month, the one that maintained itself without her conscious attention, and it expanded outward from the tip of her vinewood wand in a wash of warm light that sent the snare recoiling with a speed that was almost affronted. The tendrils retreated to the edges of the chamber with the decisiveness of something that has encountered its specific weakness and has no interest in repeating the experience. They dropped to the floor below. The next chamber was full of keys. Flying keys, hundreds of them, a bright rushing cloud of silver and gold against stone, and Harry looked at them for 4 seconds before spotting the pattern. One was flying slightly wrong, its movement fractionally less fluid than the others, the kind of imprecision that indicated something recently repaired. A wing bent on landing. 3 brooms were in the chamber. "I'll go," Harry said. He was on the broom and in the air before the sentence was fully out, because thinking about it was not going to be more useful than doing it, and he'd been doing this since October with his reflexes rebuilt and his left side response corrected. The keys were a chaos that was also a pattern, and he read the pattern the way he read the snitch, as a conversation, fast and continuous, tracking the broken-winged one through the mass of its identical neighbors. He caught it in 40 seconds. The door opened. He was back on the ground in 55. Hermione looked at him with an expression that was trying to be measured and was actually slightly odd, which was the expression she wore when something practical exceeded her theoretical model of it. 55 seconds, she said. It had a damaged wing, he said. Made the movement distinctive. I know, she said. 55 seconds is still. She stopped. Through the door. The chessboard was next. It was enormous. Human-sized pieces of black marble and white marble standing on a floor-sized board, and the black pieces were already positioned in the particular configuration of a game already in progress, which meant Quirrell had played through here and had solved it, differently. Harry suspected brute force, the way someone solved a problem they understood as an obstacle rather than as a puzzle. Ron looked at the board for 90 seconds. Harry watched Ron look at it, and watched the particular quality of focus that came over Ron's face when he was doing this. The thing Harry had meant when he said chess, the thing that Ron had not yet been given enough reasons to believe was significant. White, Ron said. Knight d5. Then bishop to c4. The queen move opens the path in 4 more moves. He paused. I take a rook for the queen. Maybe a rook and a bishop. I'll manage. You'll manage, Harry said. Ron stepped onto the board and became a castle piece, which replaced the marble one with the instantaneous logic of the game's enchantment. Harry and Hermione took pawns. What followed was not comfortable. The black pieces moved with the autonomous purposefulness of pieces that understood their function and pursued it without hesitation, and Ron directed from his castle square with the controlled urgency of someone playing 15 moves ahead while managing immediate threats. He lost 2 pawns in the first exchange. Lost the bishop taking a knight that had gotten too close to Harry's position. Called the moves without flinching, without second-guessing, with the specific kind of confidence that only came from understanding something deeply enough to trust it. The queen's sacrifice happened on the 6th move. Ron called it himself, and his castle piece advanced, and the black queen took it with the decisive violence of the game's rules, and Ron went down hard. Harry was there before the piece finished its movement, catching him, checking him, breathing, pulse steady, a cut on his forehead from where the marble edge had caught him. Nothing broken, nothing critical. Go, Ron said through what was clearly not no pain. The path's open. I've got 3 moves and you're through. Go. We're coming back, Harry said. Obviously, Ron said with the strained practicality of someone who is hurt and is not going to make it anyone's problem. Go do the thing. Harry looked at him for 1 more second. Then he nodded, and he and Hermione moved. Snape's chamber was exactly what Hermione had predicted. A row of bottles on a shelf, a low fire at the far archway, a curtain of black flames at the one behind them. On the shelf, a rolled piece of parchment. Hermione picked it up and read it once. Turned it over. Read it again. 45 seconds, she said, which was not the less she'd claimed but was still remarkable. She pointed at a small round bottle on the left. This one through the black fire. This one, she pointed at another, gets you back through. There's only enough of the second for one. Harry looked at the bottles. Then at her. You go back, he said. She looked at him. Harry, there's 1 dose to go back, he said. You go back. Get Ron out. Go to McGonagall, or Dumbledore if you can find him. I go forward. I'm not leaving you to face, Hermione. He said it the way he said things when they were decided, which was without particular force and with complete certainty. I need you to do this part. Not because you can't fight. Because Ron is alone and hurt, and someone needs to get out of here and get help, and that someone needs to be capable of explaining the situation accurately and completely. He paused. That's you? She looked at him with the expression that was all the way to the back of her, the one that was not composed or managed but simply present. The bond between them was warm and taut as a plucked string. You don't know exactly what's in there, she said. I know enough, he said. If you need, she started. I know, he said. I'll feel you there. That's enough. A beat. Another. Then she picked up the small round bottle and held it out to him. He took it, and as he did her hand closed briefly around his, not the glancing brush of a library in August but a deliberate, full grip, warm and fierce and certain. Come back, she said. Simple. Not a request. Yes, he said. Not a promise. A fact. She held his hand for 3 more seconds. Then she let go and stepped back toward the black flames with her own bottle, and Harry turned to the fire-curtained archway and drank the small bottle in one. Cold moved through him, not unpleasant, efficient. The fire parted. He stepped through. The final chamber was not what he'd expected, which was unusual. He'd expected more. More architecture, more visible power, more of the theatrical apparatus of menace. It was a single room, stone and torchlit, and in the center stood the mirror of Ariste. He looked at it without going toward it. He understood, looking at it, what Dumbledore had done, had moved it here after their conversation, had repositioned his trap with the information Harry had inadvertently given him. I want a life that's mine. Dumbledore had taken that and built it into the last defense. Quirrell was at the mirror. His back was to Harry, which meant Harry had walked into a room with someone who had already made themselves vulnerable, and he spent exactly 2 seconds deciding what to do about that. "Stop," he said. Quirrell turned. His face was going through something complicated, the nervous effect of the stuttering professor overlaid with something else, something colder and more purposeful underneath, 2 things trying to occupy the same space. "Potter," Quirrell said. No stutter. None at all. A different voice, nearly, the same mouth, but a different quality of use. "I wondered. I'd thought Dumbledore might send you." "He didn't," Harry said. "I came because I knew you were here." Quirrell studied him with those odd, doubled eyes, Quirrell's uncertainty and something else's intelligence, together. "You knew about me. Since when?" "October," Harry said. "You smell wrong." Something moved across Quirrell's face that was not Quirrell's. Amusement, maybe, or its cold equivalent. "You're 11 years old," Quirrell said. "People keep mentioning that," Harry said. "As though it's a factor in what's true." He was watching the mirror. The stone wasn't there yet, Quirrell hadn't gotten it, hadn't solved the final puzzle, which meant Harry had arrived in time. He looked at the mirror and understood what Dumbledore had told him. Only the person who wanted the stone but not to use it would be able to extract it from the mirror. Someone who wanted to use it would see themselves using it, would see power, immortality, and reach for a reflection. Quirrell had been standing here, reaching for a reflection, and couldn't close the gap. "You can't get it," Harry said. Quirrell's borrowed eyes went sharp. "No," he said. "But I wonder if you can." A pause. "Look in the mirror, Potter." Harry looked at the mirror. It showed him the same thing it had shown him on Thursday night, the room full of light, Hermione laughing, the life that was his. And in his hand, in the reflection, a small red stone. He felt it in his pocket a moment later. The weight of it, sudden and real. He kept his face still. He understood. The mirror had given it to him because he'd looked at it and seen the life, not the stone, and the stone had come as a consequence of wanting the right thing. He did not reach into his pocket. He kept his hands at his sides. "Well?" Quirrell said. "I see myself shaking your hand," Harry said, "and wishing you a pleasant evening." The double eyes looked at him. Then Quirrell's hands went to the turban. "You're lying," said a voice that was not Quirrell's voice and was not using Quirrell's mouth. It came from the back of his head, as the turban unwound and Harry saw the face, what remained of it, pressed into the back of Quirrell's skull like a feature of the bone, alive in the way things were alive when they refused everything that made life worth having. Harry looked at it. He had been thinking about this moment since September, and now it was here and he found he felt exactly what he'd expected to feel. Not fear, not the paralysis of a child confronting something too large. A clear, focused attention. The same thing he felt when the snitch was in the air. "Give me the stone," Voldemort said. Because that was who it was. Not a name Harry had avoided or feared, just a name, a fact, a man who had made catastrophic choices and was now a consequence of them living in the back of a teacher's head. "Give it to me and I will spare you. You could join me. You have power, Potter, I can feel it from here. Extraordinary power for a child." "I'm not interested in joining anything that requires a host's body," Harry said. Something that might have been a face somewhere in the vestigial features shifted. "I know what you carry," it said. "The girl. The bond. Very old magic, that. Very powerful. I know all about Veela claims." A pause, deliberate. "She would be useful to me." Harry felt something move through him. Not anger. Anger was hot and he was cold, the specific cold of something deciding. The bond between him and Hermione was warm even now, across the distance and the fire and the stone. He could feel her, had felt her since he walked through the flames, that steady warm signal, alive and present and entire. "No," he said. One word. The same way he'd said enough to Rookwood's nephews in Knockturn Alley. Not loudly. just as a fact that closed the matter. Quirrell's arms came up and he lunged. Harry moved. Not away. Quirrell lurched forward and Harry stepped inside it, the way you stepped inside a large person's reach to nullify the advantage of their size, which was something Harry had learned at 7 from a book about self-defense and had never had occasion to use until now. He caught Quirrell's outstretched hands. The reaction was immediate and catastrophic, not for Harry. He'd known about this, theoretically, since November, Lily Potter's sacrifice, the protection woven into his blood. The old magic, as Dumbledore called it. He'd thought about it the way he thought about most things, practically and without mysticism. It was a physical property of his skin when it came to Voldemort's presence, a contact incompatibility that Voldemort would have researched and presumably known about, which meant Quirrell charging at him was either a miscalculation or a test. The pain in Quirrell's face said it was a miscalculation. Harry held on. Not because he enjoyed it. Because Quirrell was in between him and Voldemort, and that was the geometry of the situation, and he understood what happened if Quirrell fell. Voldemort needed a body. Quirrell had been that body. Without Quirrell, Voldemort was a consciousness in a room with no vessel and a boy who was not afraid of him. He held on until Quirrell's legs went and they both went down, and then Harry rolled away and came up onto one knee and watched. What happened next was not dramatic in the expected sense. It was more like watching something dissolve, the cold wrong thing that had been pressing against the inside of Quirrell's presence for months, that Harry had been feeling since September like a coin against the skin, pushed out. It went through the room like a sudden wind and Harry felt it pass through him and felt his scar flare once, sharp and brief, a line of pain that came and went. Then it was gone. The room was still. Quirrell was on the floor, breathing in the shallow way that said he was alive and would remain so but had paid a substantial price. On the shelf above the mirror, the stones sat in plain view, visible now that whatever enchantment had maintained the mirror's function had been disrupted. Harry walked to the shelf and picked it up. It was small. Red. Warm in the way things were warm when they contained something old. He put it in his pocket, next to where it had already been, and the mirror reflected nothing in particular now, just a room and a boy and a collapsed teacher and the residue of something enormous. He crouched down beside Quirrell. The man's breathing was steadying. His face, without the doubled quality it had carried for months, was just a face, tired, middle-aged, the face of someone who had made a catastrophic choice a long time ago, and had not understood until now the full weight of what he'd agreed to. "You made a mistake," Harry said, not cruelly. Factually. Quirrell's eyes opened. Just Quirrell's eyes. "Yes," he said, in just Quirrell's voice, thin and exhausted. "I know. Dumbledore will." Harry started. "I know," Quirrell said again. He looked at Harry with the washed-out expression of someone on the other side of something enormous. "You're not what I expected. I've gathered that's a theme," Harry said and stood up. He walked back through the chambers. The fire retreated for him. The enchantment recognized the stone in his pocket, or recognized him, or both. He passed through the potions room and through the chessboard, where the pieces had frozen in position, Ron's sacrifice still geometrically intact, and through the flying keys and the devil's snare, and the dark channel of the trapdoor, and up through the trap and the sleeping dog and the third-floor corridor, and into the castle proper. McGonagall was in the corridor. Dumbledore was beside her. Also Hermione, who was standing 6 feet behind McGonagall with her arms crossed and an expression that was the expression of someone who has been prevented from going somewhere they've been trying very hard to go, and who has used the time productively by being furious about it. She looked at Harry when he came through the door. Her eyes went from his face to his hands to his face again. "You're all right," she said. "Yes," he said. She exhaled, not dramatically, just fully, the sound of someone releasing something they'd been holding since he'd walked through black fire. Then she walked forward and the 3 adults had the social sense to look at something else for a moment, as she reached him. "Ron," Harry said immediately. "McGonagall got him out," Hermione said. "He's on his way to the hospital wing. He's fine. Concussion and a deep bruise, Madame Pomfrey's already, good, Harry said. She was standing close enough that the warmth of the bond was almost visible, that slight shimmer in the air between them. Her vinewood wand was in her hand, and her jaw was still set with the residue of a fury she was now releasing, and she looked at him with the fullness of everything the bond carried. All the years of letters and Thursdays, and the library in August, and the mirror, and the common room fire, and the 55 seconds, and the 3 seconds of her hand around his through black flame. He reached into his pocket, and held out the stone. She looked at it. Then at him. "You got it," she said. "That was the plan," he said. "Yes," she said. "Yes, it was." She didn't take it, it wasn't hers to take. But she reached out and touched the back of his hand briefly, the same gesture as the library 4 years ago, and the same recognition moved through the air between them, less shocking now and more fundamental, like a river that had been running a long time and had found its bed. Dumbledore's voice behind them. "Harry." He turned. Dumbledore was looking at him with the blue eyes and the full weight of whatever he was feeling, which was complicated enough that Harry couldn't entirely read it. McGonagall was looking at the stone with the controlled expression of someone for whom the last hour had been significantly beyond what she'd prepared for. Harry walked to Dumbledore and held out the stone. Dumbledore took it with both hands. He looked at it for a moment. Then at Harry. "Quirrell is alive," Harry said. "He's in the final chamber. He needs medical attention and probably a significant amount of help that isn't medical." "Yes," Dumbledore said. "I'll see to him." A pause. "Are you hurt?" "No." Another pause longer. Something working its way through those blue eyes. "You went in before he could reach the stone." "Yes," Harry said. "Without telling me." "You would have told me to wait," Harry said. "Or you would have gone yourself. Either way, something would have been different from what was necessary." Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. McGonagall made a sound that was almost inaudible and might have been "Good Lord." "What was necessary?" Dumbledore repeated. "He had a deadline," Harry said. "Voldemort was pushing him. The stone would have moved tonight either way. I went early enough to control the circumstances." He paused. "Quirrell couldn't get it from the mirror because he wanted to use it. I could get it because I didn't." Another pause. "I assume you knew that when you set the mirror as the last protection. I assume you had a version of tonight in your plan that looked like this, more or less." Dumbledore looked at him with those blue eyes for a long moment. Then he said quietly, "More or less. But a more manageable version," Harry said. "With less independent action." "Yes," Dumbledore said, and there was something in his voice that was honest in the way things were honest when the performance has become too much work. "Considerably less." He looked at the stone in his hands. "You are going to be very difficult to plan around, Harry." "Good," Harry said pleasantly. "I'd rather be consulted than planned around, if it's all the same." McGonagall made the almost inaudible sound again. It was closer to extraordinary this time. "Get some sleep," Dumbledore said. "We will talk. Properly. When you've rested." "Tomorrow morning," Harry said. "Not when I've recovered and you've had time to prepare." "Tomorrow morning." Dumbledore looked at him. Then he nodded once, and there was something in the nod that was a concession, genuinely offered. "Tomorrow morning," he agreed. Harry turned back to Hermione, who had watched this entire exchange with her arms still crossed and an expression of comprehensive attention. He raised his eyebrows. "Not bad," she said. "Damned with faint praise," he said. "High praise," she said. "From me. You know the differential." He did. He smiled, the real one, the one he mostly kept for her. "Let's go see Ron." They walked down the corridor together toward the hospital wing, the castle settling around them in the deep quiet of 2 in the morning, their footsteps the only sound. The warmth of the bond was steady between them, stronger perhaps than it had been before he'd walked through the fire and come back, as though the tension of the intervening hour had drawn the string tighter and it was still vibrating. "He said something about you," Harry said, as they turned toward the east wing. "Voldemort?" He said you'd be useful to him. She was quiet for 3 steps. What did you say? No, Harry said. She glanced at him. The torchlight caught the edge of her expression. That's it. Just no? It seemed sufficient, he said. She was quiet for another moment. What did he say after that? He tried to grab me, Harry said. That went poorly for him. She stopped walking. He stopped too and turned to look at her. She was looking at him with an expression that had gone somewhere past composed and past furious into something quieter and more fundamental. You held on, she said. To Quirrell. With the protection, you knew it would hurt him and you held on. I needed to separate Voldemort from a viable host, Harry said. Harry. It was the right tactical, I know it was tactical, she said. I know you thought it through. I know you're fine. She paused. She stopped. The torchlight. The quiet castle. 4 years of letters and the bond humming warm between them, and the expression on her face that had gone past all its usual management. I know, Harry said quietly. Because he did. He could feel what she was feeling through the bond, the specific, precise relief of someone who had been holding something down for an hour and was now allowed to feel it. Not fear. The aftermath of fear, which was different, more honest. He stepped forward and put his arms around her the way she'd done in the bathroom after the troll, not tentative, not managed, just present and certain, and she put her arms around him, and they stood in the corridor of the castle in the middle of the night with the warmth of the bond between them like a lit room, like a key in a lock, like the original moment in the library only more so. Because they were older and they understood more and the thing between them had had 4 years to become what it was. She exhaled into his shoulder. He felt her relax, fully, for the first time since before he'd gone through the flames. Don't do that without me again, she said. There was 1 dose to go back, he said. The math was, I don't care about the math. You always care about the math. I care about the math, she amended. And also about you not walking into fire without me. He thought about this. Fair, he said. She pulled back far enough to look at him. They were 11 years old and they had been building towards something for 4 years, and the thing they were building was not simple and was not finished, and required more time and more age and more of everything, and both of them knew this with the same certainty. They knew most important things. But the foundation was here. It had been here since a Tuesday in a library, and the warmth of it was the truest thing Harry knew. Ron, she said, practical again, stepping back. Ron, he agreed. They walked to the hospital wing. Ron was propped up in the bed nearest the door with a bandage on his head and the alert, bright-eyed expression of someone who is hurt and has decided to be interested in things rather than sorry for himself, which Harry had expected and liked. Did you get it? Ron asked. Yes, Harry said. Ron exhaled. Brilliant. He looked between them. Both of you all right? Fine, Harry said. Fine, Hermione said. Ron looked at them with the quick social intelligence he applied to things that weren't chess and said, Right, in the tone of someone who has observed something and chosen not to press on it. So what happens now? Harry sat down in the chair beside his bed. Hermione took the one on the other side. The hospital wing was quiet and clean and smelled like herbs, and somewhere above them the castle was doing whatever castles did when the immediate emergency had resolved and the long work was beginning. Now Dumbledore has the stone, Harry said. Voldemort doesn't have a body. That doesn't make him gone. He's been looking for a way back for 10 years and he'll keep looking. So we've bought time, Ron said. We've bought time, Harry confirmed. And we've established something about what we know and what we're capable of, which is useful information for everyone involved, including us. Ron nodded. He reached for the water on his nightstand and drank, then settled back. My mum's going to lose her mind when she hears about this, he said. Probably, Harry said. She'll want to come. She'll write a letter. He considered. Might be several letters. Stacked. Probably. Harry said again. Right. Ron looked at the ceiling. Worth it though, he said simply. The chessboard. What I did with the chessboard. He paused, and something in his expression was the expression of someone trying on an idea they hadn't quite tried before. I did that well, didn't I? You did that perfectly, Harry said. We couldn't have gone through without you. Ron was quiet for a moment. The expression settled into something that was not quite comfortable yet, but was heading there, the look of someone understanding that their specific capability is real and was necessary and was seen. Okay, Ron said. Good. He closed his eyes. I'm going to sleep now. Wake me up if Voldemort comes back. We'll manage, Harry said. I know you will, Ron said, already half asleep. That's why I said it. Harry looked at Hermione across Ron's bed. She was looking at Ron with the expression of someone revising a friendship estimate upward, which he recognized because he'd done the same thing in September and continued doing it incrementally for 4 months. The hospital wing was quiet. Outside the windows the December sky was beginning to go from black to the deep blue that came before dawn. The stone was in Dumbledore's hands. Quirrell was somewhere being tended to. Voldemort was a consciousness without a body, which was not solved but was significantly better than the alternative. They were 11 years old and they had done this tonight, the 3 of them, and the world was not safe and the work was not finished, but the first move was theirs and they had made it well. Harry leaned back in his chair and felt the warmth of the bond and Ron's steady breathing and the castle around him and the coming dawn through the windows, and he was not afraid of what came next. He was ready for it. He had been ready for a long time. Chapter 6. What We Are. Dawn came into the hospital wing slowly, the way Scottish dawns came in December, reluctant, gray at the edges first, then a gradual commitment to light that felt earned. Harry had slept 2 hours in the chair beside Ron's bed. He knew it was 2 hours because he woke with the specific alertness of someone whose internal clock had made a decision, and the windows were pale, and the wing was quiet, and Hermione was asleep in the chair on the other side, her head tilted against her shoulder, and Crookshanks installed across her lap with the proprietary calm of an animal who had decided this was his chair by extension. Harry sat still for a moment, and looked at the room. Ron breathing steadily. Hermione's hair doing its autonomous thing, a strand of it catching the pale light from the window. The stone gone from his pocket, which was the correct outcome. The scar on his forehead quiet for the first time he could remember, not absent, exactly, but dormant in the way things went dormant when the pressure sustaining them was suddenly removed. He thought about Voldemort. Not with fear. With the practical attention he gave to ongoing problems. Voldemort was a consciousness without a body, reduced, limited, but not ended. He had been in that condition for 10 years already and had survived it, had found Quirrell, had almost reached the stone. Whatever came next would involve another attempt, another approach, another body or method or strategy. The 10-year timeline wasn't going to compress to nothing just because last night had gone well. But last night had gone well. That was also a fact worth holding. He heard footsteps in the corridor, not urgent, measured, the footsteps of someone walking with deliberate calm and arriving where they intended, and Dumbledore came through the hospital wing door with the early morning quality of someone who had not slept and was not going to pretend otherwise. He was wearing deep blue robes and his half-moon glasses, and his expression was the most unguarded Harry had seen it, which was still fairly guarded but was notably different from the public version. He looked at Ron asleep. At Hermione asleep. At Harry awake. You said tomorrow morning? Harry said quietly, so as not to wake them. I did, Dumbledore agreed. He pulled a chair from the nearest empty bed and sat down with the careful movements of a man whose bones remembered that he was 110 years old. You're not surprised to see me. I knew you wouldn't sleep, Harry said. There's too much to recalibrate. Dumbledore looked at him. Is that how you think of it? Recalibrating. Isn't that what you're doing? A pause. Dumbledore took off his glasses and cleaned them on his robes, which Harry had come to understand was a gesture that bought time while appearing to do something useful. I am, he said. He put the glasses back on. Harry, I owe you an honest conversation. Several, perhaps. Yes, Harry said. You do. Dumbledore did not flinch at the directness of it. Harry had suspected he wouldn't. Dumbledore was not a man who flinched. He was a man who absorbed things and decided what to do with them, which was different. I have been managing your life, Dumbledore said, in the tone of someone who has decided that performing regret is less useful than simply stating the fact. From a distance for 10 years. The placement with your aunt and uncle was deliberate, Harry said. Was deliberate, Dumbledore confirmed. Lily's protection, the blood magic her sacrifice created, was anchored in your mother's line. While you lived where her blood dwelt, the protection held. That was the reasoning. I know the reasoning, Harry said. I found the correspondence in the Gringotts vault. The letters to my parents' solicitor. He paused. The reasoning was sound. The execution was less so. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. They were not kind to you. No, Harry said. They were not. I knew there was difficulty, Dumbledore said, and the word landed with the weight of a significant understatement being consciously offered as such. I told myself the protection was paramount. That the greater good of the protection outweighed. He stopped. Something in his face did the thing that faces did when they arrived at the honest version of a justification and found it wanting. I told myself many things. Over time, telling yourself things becomes habit. Harry looked at him. I'm not going to tell you it's all right, he said. Because some of it isn't. But I understand the structure of why you made the choices you made. You thought the greater good required a specific version of me, someone shaped by circumstance, humbled by it, easier to place in the role you'd prepared. He paused. You got someone else. I got someone considerably better, Dumbledore said, which was said simply and without flattery, which was why Harry believed it. What I want, Harry said, is to not have decisions made for me without my knowledge. That's the core of it. I understand there are things you know that I don't. I understand that you've been fighting this war longer than I've been alive. I'm not asking to run everything. He met the blue eyes directly. I'm asking to be told the truth when it involves me. That is, Dumbledore said, after a moment, a reasonable thing to ask. Yes, Harry said. It is. Dumbledore looked at the middle distance for a moment, at the window with its growing pale light, at the hospital wing's clean white certainty. There is a prophecy, he said. I know, Harry said. The blue eyes came back. How much? The broad structure. 2 people, one must kill the other, power he knows not. Harry watched Dumbledore register each piece of prior knowledge and adjust. I found the reference in my father's correspondence. He and my mother knew. They chose to fight anyway. He paused. That was their choice. I'd like to make mine with equivalent information. Dumbledore was silent for long enough that Harry heard Crookshanks readjust on Hermione's lap and Ron make a small sleeping sound and the wind move against the windows outside. The one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord approaches, Dumbledore said quietly, as though the words had a physical weight he was lifting carefully. Born to those who have thrice defied him, born as the 7th month dies. And the Dark Lord will mark him as his equal, but he will have power the Dark Lord knows not. And either must die at the hand of the other, for either can live while the other survives. Harry held the words and turned them over in the methodical way he held new information. He'd known the shape of them. Having the full text was different, more specific, with more edges. Power he knows not, Harry said. He doesn't know about the bond. Dumbledore looked at him. No. I don't believe he does. He knows of Veela bonds academically. He knows a great deal academically, but he has spent his life eliminating every connection he has to other people, every anchor, every vulnerability. He would not understand the bond as power. He would understand it as weakness. It's both, Harry said. Yes, Dumbledore said. The very best things are. Harry thought about Hermione in the corridor an hour before dawn, the full weight of her arms around him, the warmth of the bond like a river finding its bed. He thought about what Voldemort had said, she would be useful to me, and the absolute, uncomplicated certainty of his own no. He'll come back, Harry said. He's not gone. No, Dumbledore agreed. He is not. He is reduced, and without a body, and last night set him back considerably. But the prophecy binds you both until it is resolved, one way or another. Then we'll resolve it, Harry said. When the time comes. On our terms. Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. I believe you, he said, and the simplicity of it was the most honest thing Harry had heard him say. The stone, Harry said. Nicholas has agreed to its destruction, Dumbledore said. He and his wife have had long enough lives, he tells me, and he sounds more at peace with that than most people sound about getting an extra hour of sleep. Something moved in his expression that was the private version of the famous warmth, quieter and more genuine. It was the right decision. Good, Harry said. Dumbledore stood, with the careful movements of someone who has been sitting for a while, and whose body has noted it. He looked at Harry with the accumulated weight of everything the morning had covered. You will encounter resistance, he said. Not from me, not any more, or as little as I can manage. But from others. The ministry. Certain families. People who have stories about you that they prefer not to have contradicted. I know, Harry said. They will find you more difficult to manage than they expect. Most people do, Harry said, and caught the flicker at the corner of Dumbledore's mouth. Indeed, Dumbledore said. The cloak is yours, incidentally. Your father's. I should have given it to you directly rather than. A pause, placing it where you'd find it as part of a larger arrangement. I know, Harry said. I figured that out in November. Dumbledore's mouth moved again. Of course you did. He turned toward the door, then paused. For what it's worth, Harry, and I am aware I have limited standing to offer it, your parents would be extraordinarily proud. Of who you are. Not what you did last night, though that was remarkable. Who you are. Harry held that for a moment. Hagrid said something like that, he said. In September. Hagrid is often wiser than he is given credit for, Dumbledore said. Good morning, Harry. Get some more sleep if you can. He went. The hospital wing settled into its quiet. Harry leaned back in his chair and looked at the ceiling and thought about the prophecy and Voldemort and the future, and found that none of it sat on him heavily. It sat on him the way important things sat when you looked at them clearly and understood their dimensions, present, real, requiring action at the right time, but not crushing. Not consuming. He looked over at Hermione. She was still asleep, Crookshanks a warm weight on her lap, her face in the pale morning light unguarded in the way it was when she wasn't watching herself. The vinewood wand was still tucked behind her ear somehow, which told him she'd fallen asleep in the chair already dressed and armed and ready, which was entirely consistent. He felt the bond, warm and steady, that river that had been running since August 1991 and before, since the moment in the library when everything sleeping in her had woken up and said yes. He smiled, looked back at the ceiling, and was asleep in 4 minutes. Ron was discharged from the hospital wing at 9. Madame Pomfrey gave him a potion that handled the concussion with the efficiency of someone who found Quidditch injuries more dramatic than genuinely dangerous, and told him he was free to go with the specific warmth she reserved for patients who had been cooperative, which Ron had been in the way someone was cooperative when they'd spent the night being cheerfully interested in the hospital wing's operations. He left with the bandage replaced by a small healing charm and the bright-eyed energy of someone who has had an interesting night and is ready to process it with people who were there. McGonagall found them in the corridor outside the wing at 9:30. She looked at all three of them with the expression of her that existed behind the professional face, the one that ran about 30 degrees warmer and was considerably less composed than the classroom version. I would like to say, she said in the voice of someone choosing words with extreme care, that what you three did last night was reckless, unauthorized, and deeply inadvisable. A pause. I would also like to say that it was brilliantly executed and that I am. Another pause. Not furious. Which surprises me somewhat. We gathered the relevant information first, Hermione said. It wasn't impulsive. I know that, McGonagall said, and she did know it. Harry could see the knowledge of it in her face, the assessment of a woman who had been watching her students carefully and had not entirely known what she was watching. That's rather the point. She looked at Harry. 50 points to Gryffindor. Each. For courage, intelligence, and the kind of decisive action that I would prefer you never repeat, and which I find I cannot entirely condemn. Ron's jaw dropped. He did the arithmetic. That's 150 points, Hermione said, without needing to do the arithmetic. That puts us well ahead, Ron said, with the satisfied quality of someone for whom house points mattered in a way that was entirely uncomplicated. McGonagall looked at Harry specifically for a moment, with the expression of someone arriving at a thought they'd been circling. My door is open, she said. Should you ever wish to talk through situations before they become midnight operations? I appreciate that, Harry said. Use it, she said, and walked away with the brisk certainty of someone who has said what they came to say and has further work to attend to. Ron stared after her. Did McGonagall just offer to help us plan things? She offered to be consulted, Hermione said. Which is different. But yes, essentially. She's been watching us since September, Harry said. She knows we're going to do things regardless. She'd rather know about them. Ron processed this. That's actually quite reasonable. Most things are when you look at them clearly, Hermione said. The great hall at breakfast was louder than usual for a December morning, which told Harry the story had already moved. He tracked it as they crossed the hall, the quality of attention that arrived before they reached the Gryffindor table, the way conversations paused and then resumed at a different pitch. Not all of it was about last night. Some of it was about last night being about Harry Potter, which was a different layer. He sat down and started eating and did not perform unawareness of being watched, because he'd learned that performing unawareness was its own kind of performance. The Weasley twins materialized from the middle of the table with the synchronized movement they used when something interesting was happening, and they wanted proximity. So, Fred said in the quiet voice they used when they were being deliberately discreet, which was different from their regular volume the way a shout was different from a murmur. Word is, George continued. 3rd floor corridor. Last night. The 3 of you. Stone. Troll of a teacher. The other one. Fred added. Right, Harry said. Both twins looked at him. Then at Hermione. Then at Ron, who was eating with the focused application of someone who had had a long night and had a medical professional's blessing and was therefore entitled to a full breakfast. And? Fred said. And what? Harry said. That's it, George said. Just and? We handled it, Harry said. The twins exchanged a look that contained the full conversation. Then they both sat down, one on each side, and commenced eating with the comfortable ease of people who have decided to occupy a space and are doing so without requiring anything in return. For the record, Fred said after a while, we'd have gone with you, George said. If you'd asked, Fred finished. Harry looked at one, then the other. I know, he said. Next time. Both twins turned to look at him with the quick assessment they deployed when something caught their attention genuinely. You mean that? Fred said. Yes, Harry said simply. Another exchange of the silent conversation. Then George said, right then. And Fred said, good. And they went back to eating, and Harry understood that something had been established in the way things were established when people who paid attention were involved. Neville arrived late, slightly breathless, and slid into the seat across from Harry with his oatmeal and a look that said he'd heard enough from the dormitory conversation he'd missed to know something had happened. He looked at Harry, then at Ron's small healing charm, then back at Harry. You're all right, Neville said, and it was not quite a question and not quite a statement, It was the thing you said when the relief of something was more present than the right vocabulary. Fine, Harry said. So is everyone. Neville exhaled. He looked at his oatmeal. I heard some of it. This morning. People talking. He paused. You did what I couldn't have done. You don't know that, Harry said. I do, Neville said simply, without self-pity. I know what I can and can't do. I can't. He gestured vaguely. That. Yet. But He stopped again. What? Harry said. Neville looked at him directly, which was something Neville had been doing more of as the months progressed, the door opening another increment. I want to learn, he said. More than I'm learning in class. I want to actually. He searched for the right word. Be good at this. Harry looked at him. The morning sessions, he said. Tuesday and Thursday. 6:15 by the lake. Come on Thursday. Neville blinked. You mean I mean come, Harry said. Bring your wand. We'll see where you are. Hermione, across the table, had been listening. She met Harry's eyes and gave him the small nod that meant she'd already considered this and agreed. Neville looked like someone who had walked through a door and found a larger room than they'd expected. Okay, he said. Yes. Okay. He picked up his spoon. Thursday. Thursday, Harry confirmed. The official version of the night's events was delivered by Dumbledore at a brief all-school assembly the day before Christmas break, which was the most public the matter was going to get at the school level. He described an incident involving the school's security measures, a targeted intrusion, and the intervention of students who had responded with courage and intelligence. He did not name anyone. He did not describe the stone. He gave away nothing that Voldemort's remaining allies in the wider world could use, which Harry thought was the correct call and noted as an example of Dumbledore doing his job well. The wider wizarding world was, as Harry understood from the daily prophet delivered by Athena over the following days, not entirely aware of what had happened. There were rumors. There were always rumors in a world where information moved by owl post and whispered pub conversation, but the official position was that an incident at Hogwarts had been resolved without casualties, and the Philosopher's Stone had been moved to a secure location, and there was no further comment. What this meant in practice was that Harry received 14 letters in the first week of Christmas break, which he was spending at the Grangers because Hermione's mother had arranged it 3 months ago, and the Dursleys had offered no objection. The letters ranged from curious to effusive to, in 3 cases, pointed inquiries about Harry's intentions and affiliations from people who signed their names with the kind of confidence of people accustomed to their names meaning something. He read all of them with equanimity and drafted replies that were polite and completely non-committal, which Hermione reviewed and found satisfactory. 2 letters he read differently. One was from Gringotts, which he'd been expecting, a formal notification that his scheduled account review had been moved to the 2nd week of January, and that Ragnarok would be meeting with him personally, and that there were additional matters beyond the standard inheritance review that required direct discussion. One was from an address in southern France that Hermione went very still over when he handed it to her. This is a Veela community seal, she said, turning the envelope over carefully. The wax was pale gold and bore an impression Harry didn't recognize, a stylized flame around a woman's silhouette. I know, he said. It came with yours. She looked up. Her own envelope was in her other hand, same seal, same distinctive pale gold. They were in the Grangers' sitting room on the 22nd of December, the house decorated in the warm, excessive way of a family that celebrated Christmas with genuine enthusiasm. Her mother in the kitchen doing something that smelled like cinnamon, her father somewhere upstairs. The afternoon light was the low golden light of late winter. They opened the letters at the same time. Hermione's was longer. She read it in 60 seconds, which was fast even for her, then read it again more slowly. Her face cycled through several things, surprise, which was rare, and something more complex underneath. They've known about me since July, she said. Since the bond activated. They've been. She stopped. Watching? Harry said. Waiting. she said. That's the word she uses. The woman who signed this, her name is Sylvie Beaumont. She says she's a descendant of the same line as Colette. She says they knew when the glamour broke because there are markers they track in bloodlines. She looked up. She says they'd been waiting to see what I'd do. Harry looked at his own letter, which was shorter and addressed to him specifically, in formal but readable English. Sylvie Beaumont wrote that she was aware of the bond and its significance, that she had knowledge of the Veela heritage that would be useful to Hermione as the inheritance continued to develop, and that she wished to meet at a time and place of their choosing, with no obligation on either side. The last paragraph was the one he read twice. I wish to be clear, Mr. Potter, that we make no claim on either of you. The bond is Hermione's to navigate on her own terms, as Colette always said it should be. We offer only knowledge freely given and ask nothing in return except the opportunity to know that the line is well. That is all we have ever wanted and were never permitted to have. She's not trying to control it, Harry said. No, Hermione said. She looked at her letter again. She's genuinely just asking. She says Colette was right to leave. She says the community has changed. She doesn't ask us to believe that. She says she understands if we don't. They were quiet for a moment. Outside the window, the winter street was doing its ordinary things. Do you want to meet her? Harry asked. Hermione thought about it seriously, the way she thought about things that mattered. Yes, she said. I want to know. I've always wanted to know about this part of what I am. Even when it wasn't convenient. She paused. Do you? Whatever you decide, he said. I'll be there. That's not what I asked, she said. I asked what you want. He looked at her. I want to understand everything about what the bond is and what we are, he said. I want every piece of information available to us. And I want to meet someone who knew Colette's line and chose, after however long, to reach out honestly rather than coercively. He paused. Yes. I want to meet her. Hermione nodded slowly. January, she said. After Gringotts. We'll write and arrange it. January, he agreed. Her mother appeared in the doorway with a tea tray and the specific quality of carefully arranged casualness that meant she'd been listening from the kitchen. She set the tray down on the coffee table without comment, then sat in the armchair across from them and looked at the letters they were still holding. France? She said. France, Hermione confirmed. Jean Granger looked at the pale gold seal on Hermione's envelope for a moment. Something moved across her face. The complicated thing it did when the world Colette had run from came up. Your great-great-grandmother would have had thoughts about this, she said. I know, Hermione said. I think her thought would have been, go, but go on your own terms. Her mother looked at her for a long moment. Then she looked at Harry. Then she said, tea, and picked up the pot, and the matter was settled in the way things were settled in the Granger household, which was through practical action following principled decision. Christmas itself was 3 days of the kind of warmth Harry had read about in books and had been receiving in carefully measured installments from the Grangers for over a year, but which, experienced whole and continuous for the first time, had a quality he found he didn't have the right words for. Not overwhelming. Just complete. Her father had a ritual of watching terrible Christmas films and providing running commentary that was genuinely funny rather than performatively so. Her mother cooked food in quantities that suggested she'd been cooking for a larger family in her imagination for some time. Crookshanks observed Christmas with the dignified condescension of a creature above sentiment, who was nevertheless present for every moment of it. Athena, who Harry had brought back from Hogwarts for the break, stationed herself on the window ledge and regarded the tinsel with the patient contempt of a bird with standards. Ron sent a letter on Christmas morning along with a box of homemade fudge that turned Harry's tongue blue for 4 hours, which the letter from Fred and George suggested was not an accident, and was part of a series of experimental confections they were cataloging. Harry wrote back, blue for 4 hours. Effect consistent. Flavor acceptable. More data needed. He could feel, writing it, that this was exactly the response the twins wanted, and that made giving it easy. Neville sent a card in his careful handwriting with a postscript that said Thursday and underlined it, which Harry found he was genuinely looking forward to. He gave Hermione the complete works of Aristotle in Greek, because she mentioned in October that the only translation available in Hogwarts library was the Penguin Classics version with the footnotes removed, which she'd called a travesty. She looked at it for a moment before she opened it fully, running one finger down the spine, and then looked at him. "The original Greek," she said. "You read Greek," he said. "You've been reading it since September." "I've been learning it since September," she corrected, and he thought of all the things she learned the way other people breathed, fast and without particular drama, and how she still distinguished between what she knew completely and what she was working on, and how that distinction was something he admired without needing to say so. She gave him 3 things. A proper notebook, not a school one, something bound in dark green leather, for the morning sessions. A second-hand book on advanced charm theory that she'd found through the Magical Post network and annotated in the margins herself, her handwriting threading between the printed text in conversation with it. And a small envelope. Inside the envelope was a photograph. Muggle photography, not magical, still, not moving. Taken in August, the day at the British Museum. He didn't remember it being taken, but there they were, the steps outside, afternoon light, both of them 11 years old and slightly squinting into the sun, and Hermione was mid-sentence about something and he was listening with the full-body attention he gave things that interested him, and neither of them were performing anything. He looked at it for a long moment. "My mother took it," Hermione said. "She has a habit of photographing things she wants to remember." "Good habit," Harry said. "I thought you should have it," she said. "Since—" she stopped, then said more directly, "since you don't have many photographs." He didn't. He had the one of his parents from the Gringotts vault and 2 others he'd found in documents. That was the full inventory. "Thank you," he said. He put it in the dark green notebook, the first thing on the first page, and closed it. She was looking at him with the expression she'd had in the corridor on the 19th, the one that had no management in it. He held it for a moment and let her hold it back, because this was one of the things they were still getting the shape of, the in-person version of what they'd been doing in letters for 4 years, which was easier in some ways and required different courage in others. "Hermione," he said. "Yes?" she said. "When we're older," he said carefully, with the precision he used for things he wanted to say correctly. "And the bond has had more time, and we're further along. All of this." He paused. "I want to be clear that that's what I'm working toward. Not because the bond requires it. Because I want to." She was quiet for a moment. The Christmas light was in the room, warm and yellow, and Crookshanks was asleep by the radiator, and outside the street had the hushed quality of Christmas morning. "I know," she said. "I've known for a while." She looked at her hands, then back at him. "Me too. For the same reason." "Good," he said. "Yes," she said. "It is." They went back to their books and the warmth of the room, and neither of them needed to say anything else about it, because the bond carried what words would only have approximated. January, and back to Hogwarts with the particular energy of people returning to something they'd left mid-sentence. The school had reconvened with all the social weather of a place that had been left to its own gossip for 3 weeks, and the story of the 19th had grown in the telling, as stories did, until the versions circulating in the corridors bore an approximate relationship to what had actually happened in the way that myths bore relationships to the events that spawned them. Harry let it circulate and didn't correct it, because the corrections would create their own stories and none of that was the point. The point was Thursday morning, when Neville Longbottom appeared at the lakeside at 6:20 in a coat too large for him and wellies that had seen better days, with his wand held carefully, and his jaw set with the particular determination of someone who has decided to be afraid of exactly nothing today. Harry was already there. Hermione was on her log. "You came," Harry said. "I said Thursday," Neville said. "Yes," Harry said. "You did." He looked at him. Show me your Wingardium Leviosa. Neville did it. Harry watched. The grip, the intention, the quality of the magic that came through the wand, which was not weak, was never what Snape had implied it was, but was uncertain in the specific way that things were uncertain when the person directing them had been told too many times that they were uncertain. Your grip is fine, Harry said. The problem is in your intention. You're directing the spell at the object when you should be directing it through the object. Like, he thought for a comparison. Like pushing something versus lifting it. You're trying to push it up. Try lifting through. Neville tried it. The stone went up. Not dramatically. Not with the controlled precision Harry had been developing for 4 months. But it went up, clearly and unambiguously, and stayed there for 8 seconds before Neville lost the thread. But 8 seconds was real. Again, Harry said. Neville did it again. 10 seconds this time. Then 12. Then 15. And on the 15th second he looked at Harry with the expression of someone who has been told a story about themselves for so long that they believed it, and has just encountered evidence that the story was wrong. That's... he started. That's what you can do, Harry said. It's been there the whole time. Neville looked at his wand. Then at the stone, still on the ground where it had landed. Then back at Harry. Snape says, Snape is a brilliant potions master who has complicated feelings about your father, Harry said, simply and without cruelty. His assessment of your magical capability is not reliable data. Neville was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Okay, in the voice of someone testing out a belief. Okay, Harry confirmed. They worked for an hour. At the end of it, Hermione had given Neville 3 theoretical frameworks that reorganized how he thought about his own spell work, and Harry had run him through 4 practical exercises, and Neville's stone was going up on his first attempt every time and staying for 30 seconds. Walking back to the castle for breakfast, Neville said, Can I bring Seamus next Thursday? He wants to learn the fire control thing and I thought, yes, Harry said. And maybe Dean? He's not. He's good at the theory, but he can't get the wand movements to click. Yes, Harry said again. Neville seemed slightly surprised by how easy the answer was. Just yes? Why not? Harry said. I thought you'd want to keep it, I don't know. Small. Harry thought about the morning sessions and what they were, the practical work, the genuine learning, the space outside the curriculum where things could develop freely. He thought about what it would mean to share that space versus what it would mean to guard it. Bring whoever wants to actually work, he said. Nobody who's there to watch. Neville nodded with the decisive click of someone who has gotten a clear answer and knows what to do with it. Thursday, he said. Thursday, Harry confirmed. Gringotts on a Saturday in mid-January. Ragnarok met them personally at the door to the inner vaults, which told Harry more about the nature of the meeting than anything Ragnarok had put in the letter. Goblins did not personally meet 11-year-olds. They personally met people whose accounts warranted it, which was a category of person Harry was apparently in. Hermione's parents were there at Harry's request. He'd learned, over the past 4 years, that having her mother present in situations that involved legal or institutional weight was useful, because Jean Granger had the quality of focused intelligence that made institutions want to be correct. Ragnarok led them to a private meeting room, stone and neat, with the goblin aesthetic of function before comfort, and sat across from them with a folder of documents and the composed attention of someone who has prepared thoroughly and respects the people he's prepared for. The Potter estate, Ragnarok said, is more considerable than the standard inheritance summary suggests. He placed a document on the table. The primary vault you've accessed contains liquid assets. There is also a property trust, 2 properties currently leased, 1 maintained in preservation, and a secondary portfolio of investments in the wizarding economy that have been managed automatically in the absence of a Potter heir. Harry looked at the figures. He had expected something and had prepared himself for the reality of it. Still, the numbers had a weight that was practical rather than abstract. The properties, he said. Godric's Hollow has been preserved at Dumbledore's instruction. Ragnar said, and there was something neutral in the way he said Dumbledore's name that carried without editorializing a goblin's assessment of the instruction. The other two are leased. Both can be reclaimed at your direction. I'd like the full portfolio documented, Harry said, and I'd like to discuss management options that give me oversight rather than automatic administration. Ragnar looked at him with the flat attention goblins use for things they found worth attending to. That can be arranged. We would recommend a quarterly review given your age and current schooling. Monthly, Harry said. I'll manage it. I've been reading your quarterly reports since November. Ragnar paused. Then, monthly. He made a note. Hermione's mother, beside Harry, had the expression of someone who finds things going well and has decided not to comment in case it disrupts something. There is one other matter, Ragnar said, and placed a second document on the table. A trust account established by Sirius Black prior to his imprisonment in Azkaban. Named beneficiary, Harry James Potter. The account has been frozen pending the legal status of the depositor. We have been. He paused, with the precision of a creature who chose words carefully. Waiting for an appropriate moment to raise this. Harry looked at the document. Sirius Black is my godfather. Yes, Ragnar said. He is. He was convicted without a trial, Harry said. He had found this in the Gringotts documents in November, and had spent a week researching it. The evidence was not as clean as the official version. The details of Peter Pettigrew's supposed death. The fact that no trial records existed in the Ministry archive for Sirius Orion Black. I want to talk to someone about this. A legal avenue. Ragnar looked at him with the steady gaze of a creature who has been waiting for someone to say this for 12 years. We can provide a referral, he said. There are barristers who specialize in cases of this nature. Cases where the Ministry's procedures were expedient rather than thorough. Please, Harry said. He felt Hermione's hand close briefly around his wrist under the table. Not drawing attention. Just there. He put his other hand over hers, under the table, and kept his expression steady and his eyes on Ragnar, and thought about a man in a prison who had been put there without anyone asking if it was right, and thought about his own 10 years in a cupboard for reasons that were reasonable from a certain angle. And understood that the world was full of people doing things for reasons that were reasonable from a certain angle and catastrophically wrong from every other angle, and that the difference between letting it continue and not letting it continue was whether someone decided to look at it clearly and say no. He was good at that. The letter to Sylvie Beaumont went via the Charing Cross Road postbox with its extra slot that muggles couldn't notice, and a reply came within 3 days in the same pale gold envelope, offering a meeting in London in February at a location of their choosing. They chose the British Museum, because Hermione said it was neutral territory and Harry said it was theirs. Sylvie Beaumont was not what Harry had built from the letters. She was older, maybe 60, with the quality of stillness that some people with significant magical heritage had, as though they occupied more space than their physical presence accounted for. She had Hermione's coloring in a much older version, or Hermione had hers going forward, and when she saw Hermione for the first time in the lobby of the museum she stopped walking for just a moment with an expression Harry recognized as recognition of the particular kind that happened when you've known something abstractly for a long time, and then see it made real. You look like her, she said. Like Colette. I've been told, Hermione said. I've never minded. Sylvie looked at Harry. Her assessment was direct without being invasive, the look of someone who had been given information and was now calibrating it against the source. You're the bonded, she said. Yes, Harry said. You understand what that means. Both of you. We've been working on understanding it since we were 7, Hermione said. We have most of the theoretical framework. What we don't have is the experiential knowledge. The parts that don't appear in texts. Sylvie smiled, something genuine, without performance. Colette said the same thing, she said. About most things. She wanted to know everything and she wanted to know the true version of everything. She looked between them. I have documents. Records going back 4 centuries. Accounts from bonded Veela and their partners about the development of the bond, what to expect, what the markers mean as it matures. She paused. I also have her notebooks. Colette's original notebooks. The ones she left before she went to England. She wrote more than she took. Hermione's expression did the thing it did when something enormously significant had just landed quietly. She left notebooks here. She left everything she couldn't carry. Sylvie said. Including a letter for the girl it would eventually happen to. She wrote it the year before she died. She said she didn't know when, but she knew it would happen, and she wanted to speak to her without the interference of everyone else. They walked through the British Museum for 4 hours, which was appropriate. They talked about the bond, its stages, its nature, the way the Veela fire and the partners' magic developed in relation to each other, the things Colette's notebooks documented about the experience of someone navigating it without a community to guide them. Sylvie told them what she knew without embellishment or agenda, and when she didn't know something she said so, and when she disagreed with something in Colette's notes she said that too. She gave Hermione the original notebooks and the letter in a cedar box that had been waiting in the community's archive for 3 generations. Hermione held the box with both hands and looked at it, and Harry felt through the bond the specific quality of what she was feeling, which was the feeling of being given something you had needed without knowing you needed it, a thing reaching back through time to offer itself. Thank you, Hermione said. It was always yours, Sylvie said simply. We just held it until you were ready. Before they left, Sylvie looked at Harry one more time with the direct assessment that seemed to be her preferred mode. The bond chose well, she said, which was not flattery. It was the measured judgment of someone who had been evaluating Veela bonds across 40 years of work and was delivering a conclusion. Yes, Harry said. It did. He felt Hermione's shoulder press briefly against his. February became March, became the long British crawl towards spring, and the morning sessions grew. Seamus came, and Dean came, and by March there were 9 of them meeting twice a week by the lake in the early light, which was still cold but was beginning to consider alternatives. They were not a club. They had no name. They had no declared purpose. They were just people who showed up and worked, guided by the simple principle that Harry had operated on since he was 7. If you want to know something, learn it, and if you can, share it. Neville had become reliable with intermediate charms by March and had started helping the newer people with their basics, which he did with the careful encouragement of someone who had recently understood their own capability, and remembered what it felt like not to. Harry watched this and filed it under the category of things that were happening without being engineered. Ron was a strategist. This was the word they'd arrived at by February, not just for chess but for the way his mind worked through group problems, the way he could see a situation from above and identify the pressure points. He started contributing to the session planning without being asked to, sketching out drills that covered multiple people's weaknesses simultaneously, and Harry let him do it, and stepped back from that specific function with the ease of someone who understood that leadership was not the same as doing everything yourself. Hermione taught theory with the efficiency of someone who has spent a decade learning how to translate understanding across the gap between what she knew and what someone else needed to hear. She was not always patient, but she was always accurate, and she had learned, through Ron's observation and her own adjustment, the incremental revision of someone who revised when the data supported it, to ask before telling. Harry watched all of it, and thought about the mirror in the final chamber, and the room full of light, and the people around him in the reflection that he hadn't been able to see clearly then. He could see them clearly now. The last evening of term, before the summer holidays, Harry sat in the window seat of the Gryffindor common room and looked out at the grounds. The castle had the particular quality of last evenings, charged with endings and also, underneath, with the structure of continuing things that wouldn't stop just because the term did. Hermione came and sat across from him with Colette's letter in her hand, which told him she'd been reading it again, which she did approximately once a week. He knew the letter's contents as well as she did. She'd read it to him in December with the careful, present attention she gave to things that mattered, but she kept coming back to it the way you came back to things that meant something true about you. Colette had written to the girl who would find herself with a bond she hadn't expected and a fire she'd been taught to hide and a world with a plan for her that she hadn't been consulted on. She'd written with the directness of someone who had no patience left for anything except the essential. You will be told that being what you are is too much. You will be told to be quieter, smaller, less certain, more accommodating. This advice will come from people who are afraid of you and from people who love you, and the distinction will not always be clear at first. Be what you are anyway. Be thorough. Be curious. Be honest. The fire is not a problem to manage. It is the most honest part of you. Let it say what you are. And the person the bond chose, trust that. Not blindly, never blindly. Look at them clearly. See them. And let them see you. That is the whole of it. The rest is just time. Hermione set the letter on the seat beside her and looked at Harry. He looked at her. The fire was low and the common room was almost empty, and the castle was settling into the particular quiet of a building releasing its inhabitants for summer. What she said? Hermione said. About the rest being just time. Yes? He said. She was right. Hermione said. We have a lot of it, I think. A lot of what? Time, she said. And things worth doing with it. He thought about the summer ahead, Gringotts and Sirius Black's case, and the French community, and the morning sessions reconvening in the Grangers' back garden, and the letters that would go back and forth as they always did, and September, and second year, and the long work that was only started. He thought about Voldemort, existing somewhere without a body, waiting. He thought about Dumbledore, who had promised honest conversation and was, so far, delivering it in the careful increments of someone learning a new mode. He thought about the prophecy, sitting in his chest like a fact he'd accepted, present, real, not yet relevant, but coming. One way or another, coming. And he thought about the library on a Tuesday in August when he was 7, and a girl sitting across from him who read Greek mythology and got here the way he got here. By bus, by choice, by the particular kind of intelligence that understood that the most important questions were the ones you kept asking. He thought about the touch. The golden light. The room full of warmth behind the lock. Yes, he said. We do. The fire crackled. Outside the window the Scottish night was clear and the stars were out, and the lake was dark and still below. Somewhere in the grounds Crookshanks was conducting his nightly investigation of the perimeter with the authority of a creature who considered himself responsible for the castle's small-scale security. Somewhere above them Athena was sleeping on her perch, or wasn't, being Athena. Hermione picked up her book. Harry picked up his. They read in the quiet for an hour, and it was the same as it had always been. The comfortable silence of two people who had sorted out the important things early and were building everything else from that foundation, without hurry, without pretense, in the full and growing knowledge of what they were. Together. Choosing it. Every time. The fire burned low. The castle held them. The night outside was full of stars and the beginning of everything that was still coming. It was enough. It was more than enough. It was theirs.